Hi friends, my name is Benjamin and today I will tell you another heartbreaking story. Jennifer Gledhill was born and raised in the suburbs of Salt Lake City, Utah. Her parents recalled that she was always an energetic and caring girl who loved to help around the house and dreamed of starting a family of her own. In school, Jennifer was popular due to her friendly personality and organizational skills. After high school, she enrolled in a local college where she studied art and design, but soon decided to devote herself to creating a home and taking care of the future. Matthew Johnson was born in Salt Lake City to a military family. His father was in the Army and his mother was a school teacher. Matthew imbibed the values of discipline, hard work, and responsibility from childhood. In high school, he became interested in a career in the armed forces, inspired by the examples of his older relatives. After high school, Matthew enrolled at a local university, where he simultaneously trained in the National Guard. In 2000, fate brought Jennifer and Matthew together through mutual friends. It was a chance meeting at a party, but it changed their lives. Matthew immediately noticed Jennifer. Her smile and the warmth with which she communicated could not be overlooked. Jennifer, in turn, was charmed by his confidence and attention. Their communication quickly turned into a romance, and a year later they decided to get married. The wedding took place in a family circle, where everything was imbued with love and joy. The newlyweds were full of hopes and plans for the future. They moved into their own house in Salt Lake City, which became their family nest. Jennifer enthusiastically engaged in home improvement, and Matthew continued to build a career in the National Guard. In time, the couple had 3 children. The eldest son became the pride of his parents, showing success in school and sports. 2 younger daughters pleased the family with their childlike charm and sincerity. Jennifer fully devoted herself to her family. She tried to be the best mother, creating a cozy and warm atmosphere at home. Matthew, despite his busy schedule, always found time for the children, helping with lessons and organizing family outings on weekends. Their home was an example of a perfect family. Neighbors admired the way Jennifer skillfully combined the duties of mother and hostess, and Matthew was considered a real protector and support. At the holidays, their home was filled with friends and relatives who always felt welcome. Jennifer took pride in being able to organize such gatherings, and Matthew found them a way to relax after the service. In the spring of 2024, Jennifer attempted to obtain a protective order against Matthew, claiming that he could pose a threat to her and the children. However, the court denied her application, citing a lack of evidence. This decision left her in a state of helplessness. Jennifer increasingly left the house to spend time alone or stayed out late with friends. Her behavior became increasingly erratic, but no one close to her could have predicted that it would lead to tragedy. During this time, Matthew began to notice that Jennifer was often absent from home without explanation. Their conversations became increasingly cold, and attempts to connect ended in arguments. It later emerged that Jennifer was having an affair with another man, adding even more tension to their relationship. The family that had long seemed to be an example to others was now on the verge of complete disintegration. Matthew was still trying to maintain at least a semblance of normality for the sake of the children, but Jennifer was set on a final breakup. Her actions became unpredictable, which was alarming to family and friends. On September 29, 2024, around 9 a.m., the Salt Lake City Police Department received a disturbing call. On the line was Jennifer Gledhill, who reported in a subdued but worried voice that her husband, 51-year-old Matthew Johnson, was missing. She hadn't seen him in days and had been unable to contact him. She said, "This is totally unlike him," she told the officer. "He always gives a heads up if he's running late or going somewhere." That call was the starting point in a case that shocked the local community. Jennifer told the officer that she last saw her husband on the evening of Sept. 28. She claimed he came home after a day of work as usual, ate dinner and went to bed. In the morning, he was gone. According to her, she initially thought he had gone to work or decided to take a walk. But when Matthew didn't come home in the evening and his phone was disconnected, she became concerned. Jennifer emphasized that the lack of communication was completely atypical of her husband. Matthew was always a man of responsibility. He never just disappeared, she said. She also said that she had called several of his friends, but none of them had seen Matthew in recent days. After that, she decided to contact the police. Police officers arrived at Gledhill and Johnson's home around noon. It was a well-kept two-story house in a quiet Salt Lake City suburb. Neighbors described the family as quiet and friendly. Jennifer met the officers at the door, her face showing signs of fatigue and anxiety. The officers began by asking about Matthew's habits and his possible plans for the next few days. Jennifer explained that he had no scheduled business trips or travel and he always gave notice if he was going to be late. They didn't fight, she said, and nothing in their lives indicated any possible problems. After a brief conversation, the police asked permission to inspect the house to try to find any clues or leads. Jennifer agreed without hesitation and escorted them inside. The house looked clean and well-maintained, with nothing to suggest that anything out of the ordinary might have happened in it. Looking around the bedroom, one of the officers noticed a strong odor of cleaning products. This raised questions as the odor was particularly noticeable near the carpet next to the bed. When the officer asked Jennifer about it, she explained that she had recently cleaned because she wanted to get the house in order. While some of the officers looked around the house, others continued to talk to Jennifer. They asked her questions about what her husband was like in his daily life, where he would go, and whether he had any usual routes. Jennifer revealed that Matthew loved the outdoors and sometimes went fishing. However, she didn't know if he had planned anything like that in recent days. When asked if friends or co-workers might have known about his whereabouts, Jennifer said that she had already contacted several of them, but no one knew where he might be. She added that his phone had been disconnected the whole time, and that only added to her worries. Police officers thoroughly searched the entire house, including the basement, garage, and backyard. However, they found no traces that could indicate Matthew's whereabouts. His personal belongings, including clothing and shoes, remained in their places. Matthew's automobile was also missing, which could indicate that he had indeed left. Jennifer seemed cooperative the entire time. She answered all questions calmly, although her voice shook at times. She repeated several times that she knew nothing about where her husband might be and asked the police to do everything they could to find him. The officers asked her to let them know if she remembered any additional details that could help in the investigation. Jennifer agreed and expressed her gratitude for their assistance. After an initial inspection of the home and speaking with Jennifer Gledhill, Salt Lake City police began a full investigation to locate 51-year-old Matthew Johnson. His disappearance seemed unexplained. No warning, no trace, and most importantly, no contact with family and friends. For experienced detectives, this case was a challenge that required the application of all possible resources. In the early days of the investigation, police focused on the immediate neighborhoods in the hope that Matthew might have been nearby. Search teams were organized, scouring parks, woods, hiking trails, and other places where Jennifer said he might be. The local community also joined the search, with volunteers posting Matthew's picture in store windows and on bulletin boards. However, none of these steps yielded any results. None of the locals have seen Matthew since September 28th. Even his usual routes, such as walking trails and fishing spots, remained empty. The next major task for the police was to analyze Matthew's phone data. His cell phone was disconnected, and this immediately aroused suspicion among investigators. They requested an itemization of recent calls and messages to determine who he might have called before he disappeared. Matthew's last recorded calls were made on the afternoon of September 28th. He called work colleagues and a friend discussing routine matters. There was no indication that he was planning to leave or that anything was bothering him in these conversations. In addition, police requested the phone's location data. The last signal was recorded near Jennifer and Matthew's home, which confirmed that he was there at the time of his disappearance. The phone has since been turned off, which only heightened investigators' suspicions. Detectives also checked Matthew's financial transactions. Bank transactions are often an important clue in such cases, as they can indicate possible movements or purchases related to the disappearance. In this case, however, Matthew's banking activity was unexpectedly sparse. The last recorded transaction, buying groceries at a local store, took place on the morning of September 28th. Since then, no transactions have been made from his bank cards. This confirmed that Matthew had not withdrawn any money or used his cards to buy tickets or pay for hotels. Police suggested that Matthew may have used rail or air transportation to leave the city. Passenger lists on all flights departing from Salt Lake City in the days following his disappearance were checked. Travel records on intercity buses and trains were also examined. However, Matthew Johnson's name did not appear on any of these lists. This virtually eliminated the possibility that he had left the city by plane, train, or bus. In addition, his car, which also disappeared with him, was not found in any of the parking lots at the transportation terminals. Investigators reached out to Matthew's friends and co-workers to see if he shared his plans with anyone or complained about problems. His National Guard co-workers reported that Matthew had not shown up for work since Sept. 28. This was highly unusual for them, as he had always been noted for his punctuality and discipline. Matthew's friends were also unable to provide useful information. They all described him as a calm and judicious person who, despite his busy schedule, always remained reliable and predictable. None of them noticed anything strange in his behavior in the last days before his disappearance. Neighbors of Jennifer and Matthew interviewed by police said they did not notice anything unusual on the night of September 26th. No one heard any noise, screaming, or other suspicious noises coming from Gledhill and Johnson's home. However, one neighbor mentioned that he saw a car similar to Matthew's drive out of the garage on the evening of September 28th. Behind the wheel, he said, was a man he could not see because of the darkness. Despite all efforts, the investigation was inconclusive. Phone records, bank activity, passenger lists, and interviews failed to shed any light on Matthew's disappearance. The cops began to realize that the case was much more complicated than it seemed at first glance. The only odd points remained the strong odor of cleaning products in the house, the new mattress in the bedroom, and the thoroughly cleaned surfaces. These details kept detectives on their toes, but so far there was no direct evidence linking them to the disappearance. A week after the investigation began, police appealed to the public for help in finding Matthew. Alerts were issued with his photograph and a description of the vehicle. The media covered the case extensively, urging anyone who may have seen Matthew or his car to contact the police immediately. Despite the widespread publicity, no new leads have come forward. People called with a variety of information, but none of these leads proved useful. Matthew's car, as well as himself, remained unaccounted for. By this point, the police were at an impasse. Matthew Johnson had disappeared without a trace, leaving no obvious trace. Despite the lack of evidence of an enforced disappearance, instinct told detectives that something was wrong. All the observations made in the house and the lack of activity on Matthew's part only increased their confusion. A few weeks after the investigation had stalled, Salt Lake City police received a call that changed the course of the case. It was Wednesday evening when the hotline received an anonymous call. The person on the other end of the line spoke softly, as if he feared being overheard. "I wish to remain anonymous," the caller began, "but I have information about the Matthew Johnson case." His voice was excited but firm. He revealed that for the past few months he had been having an affair with Jennifer Gledhill, the wife of the missing man. He claimed that Jennifer had personally confessed Matthew's murder to him. The informant said that on the night of September 21st to 22nd, Jennifer allegedly shot her husband while he was sleeping. Afterward, she made every effort to cover up the traces of the crime. She said she changed the mattress to get rid of blood stains and used cleaning products to wipe away anything that would give her away, he said. The informant also said Jennifer allegedly buried Matthew's body in a shallow grave with the help of another person. He did not know the name of this person, but mentioned that Jennifer had mentioned several times about outside help. She also allegedly used their shared minivan to transport the body to the burial site. She was sure she had it all meticulously planned out, the caller continued. She even threw out the old mattress and bought a new one so there would be nothing left over. However, he said, Jennifer's conscience was bothering her, and one day she told him herself, thinking she could confide in him. The police listened to the caller carefully and recorded all the details they provided. They were shocked by what they heard. If the informant's words were confirmed, it would mean that Matthew Johnson had not just disappeared, but had been the victim of a cold-blooded murder carefully planned by his wife. The informant refused to give his name, explaining that he feared for his safety. Despite this, the police took his words seriously, as many of the details provided matched observations made earlier. For example, he mentioned a strong odor of cleaning products, which the police also noticed when they inspected the house. After this call, the investigation got a new impetus. The police decided to verify the informant's words, starting with a thorough analysis of Jennifer's home. They sought a second search warrant to look for additional evidence that could corroborate her involvement. In addition, detectives began looking for a possible accomplice mentioned in the conversation. This information was crucial as it could help determine where Matthew's body was buried. Police paid attention to other details provided by the caller. For example, he mentioned that Jennifer had talked about a discarded mattress. This led investigators to check local landfills to find this key item. If there were traces of blood on it, it would be an important piece of evidence in the case. At the same time, detectives began tracking the use of Jennifer's minivan. They requested surveillance footage from cameras in the area around her home and on the roads leading out of town. Their goal was to find footage that showed where the car might have gone the night Matthew disappeared. Weeks later, as the investigation into Matthew Johnson's disappearance reached a dead end, Salt Lake City police received an unexpected call that completely changed the course of the case. The caller, who wished to remain anonymous, offered information that not only shed light on the mysterious disappearance, but also linked Matthew's wife, Jennifer Gledhill, to the potential crime. Late that night, the police received a call from a man whose voice sounded tense but firm. "I have information about the Matthew Johnson case," he began. He clarified that he wanted to remain anonymous because he feared for his safety, but was certain that his information was extremely important. According to the caller, he had been having an affair with Jennifer Gledhill for several months. Their relationship developed in secret, but it was as part of this affair that Jennifer allegedly revealed the horrifying truth to him. The informant revealed that Jennifer confessed to him about Matthew's murder. She allegedly shot her husband while he was sleeping, and then took every possible measure to cover up the traces of the crime. She said she changed the mattress because there was blood on it, and thoroughly cleaned everything in the bedroom with bleach, the caller reported. He added that Jennifer mentioned moving the body in a minivan and burying it in a shallow grave, with the help of another person whose name the informant did not know. The call came as a shock to investigators. It coincided with a number of suspicious observations made earlier, including a strong odor of cleaning products in the house, a new mattress in the bedroom, and a strangely cleaned bed frame. Police realized that this call could have been a clue. Based on the informant's words, detectives decided to revisit the previously collected evidence and focus on finding additional evidence. The first step was to obtain a warrant to search Jennifer's home again. With warrant in hand, detectives arrived at Jennifer Gledhill's home. This time they focused their attention on the bedroom where an anonymous source said the murder had occurred. They used special chemicals to examine the bed frame to look for possible blood residue. Tests confirmed the presence of small stains that had previously been missed. These stains contained DNA that matched Matthew Johnson's. Another important finding was microparticles of gunpowder found on the bed frame. This indicated that a gunshot may indeed have been fired in the bedroom. This evidence was the first serious confirmation that Jennifer may have been involved in her husband's disappearance. After a second search, police were able to confirm another part of the informant's claim, the discarded mattress. Jennifer had previously reported that she decided to replace the old mattress with a new one, but did not specify the reason. Investigators contacted local waste management services to find out where the discarded item might have been taken. After several days of police work, the mattress was found in one of the city's landfills. It was partially damaged but still had visible bloodstains on it. DNA tests confirmed that the blood belonged to Matthew Johnson. The mattress became one of the key pieces of evidence linking Jennifer to the alleged crime. The next target for investigators was Jennifer's minivan, which the informant said was used to transport the body. Inside the vehicle, forensic investigators found traces that could have belonged to Matthew. Small bloodstains were found on the upholstery of the seats and in the luggage compartment. Despite Jennifer's attempts to thoroughly clean the car, Lab tests confirmed that it was her husband's blood. The informant mentioned that Jennifer couldn't handle hiding the body alone and had someone else helping her. This statement became a new lead for the police. They began looking into Jennifer's social circle to determine who could have been her accomplice. Among her closest friends and acquaintances, police identified several people with whom she frequently socialized in the final weeks before her husband's disappearance. Detectives also began scrutinizing surveillance footage along major roads to determine the route Matthew may have been transported. These recordings became part of a larger puzzle that investigators began to put together. The informant mentioned that Jennifer couldn't handle hiding the body alone and had someone else helping her. This statement became a new lead for the police. To corroborate this information, investigators began looking into Jennifer's social circle to see who could have helped her. Among her closest friends and acquaintances, they identified several people with whom she had frequent contact in the final weeks before Matthew's disappearance. One of the key steps was to examine Jennifer's phone records. Detectives requested an itemization of her calls in the weeks before and after the alleged murder date. The frequent communication with her parents, Thomas and Rosalind Gledhill, came to their attention. What was particularly suspicious was that immediately after September 21st, the day of Matthew's alleged disappearance, the number of calls between Jennifer and her parents increased dramatically. This could indicate that she was discussing with them what had happened or asking for help. In parallel, police were examining surveillance footage from surveillance cameras located along major roads in and around Salt Lake City. Their goal was to determine the route that Matthew may have been transported. One of the cameras near Jennifer's home captured of a minivan belonging to her family. The footage showed that the vehicle left the house late in the evening on Sept. 21 and returned a few hours later. The driver appeared to be Jennifer herself, but the passenger seat was also occupied, indicating the presence of a second person. Jennifer is currently in custody without bail, and her parents, Thomas and Rosalind Gledhill, are being investigated as suspected co-conspirators. According to the investigation, the tragedy was the result of family disagreements and custody disputes over their 3 children. According to a police statement on September 21st, 2024, Jennifer Gledhill allegedly shot her husband, Matthew Johnson, in the head while he was sleeping in their Salt Lake City home. This murder, investigators believe, was meticulously planned. After Matthew was killed, Jennifer allegedly took a series of actions to cover up the crime. The first step was to dispose of the body. Investigators believe she placed her husband's body in a container and transported it to the family minivan. Using the vehicle, she transported the body outside of town and buried it in a shallow grave. After transporting the body, Jennifer returned home to remove evidence of the crime. She replaced the mattress, discarding the old one, which had traces of blood on it. She also used bleach and other cleaning agents to remove the blood from the carpet and bed frame. These actions were intended to hamper the investigation and create the appearance of normalcy in the home. Jennifer Gledhill is now charged with 9 counts, including first-degree murder, obstruction of justice, and tampering with evidence. Her parents, Thomas and Rosalind Gledhill, are suspected of complicity in hiding the body and destroying evidence. Investigators say it was Thomas who helped Jennifer remove the body and bury it while Rosalind was cleaning the house. At this point, Matthew Johnson's body has not been found, complicating investigators' work. Hi friends, my name is Benjamin, and today I will tell you another heartbreaking story. Ashley Ann Wadsworth was born on August 27, 2002 in Vernon, located in British Columbia, Canada. She was the youngest daughter in the family of Christy Gendron and Ken Wadsworth. Her childhood was spent in the beautiful Okanagan Valley, where Ashley enjoyed nature, family warmth, and support from an early age. Her parents and older sister were her first and foremost mentors who helped mold her into those qualities that later won the hearts of many: kindness, helpfulness, and openness. The Wadsworth family lived a modest but happy life. Ashley was a smiling and cheerful child who was always looking for ways to please others. She enjoyed helping her mother with household chores and loved spending time with her father, learning from him to appreciate the simple pleasures of life. The Wadsworth home was a loving environment that made Ashley feel safe and inspired her to do good deeds. From childhood, Ashley stood out among her peers for her extraordinary kindness. Her teachers recalled how she was eager to help those who were behind in their studies and always tried to include everyone in common games. Her childhood friend, Jenna McGee, recounted that Ashley was the person who was always the first person to come up to comfort someone who was crying. "She was the ray of light that made our class better," Jenna said. From an early age, Ashley showed an interest in the spiritual life. Her parents were members of the Mormon Church, where Ashley found her calling. The church became not only a place of spiritual development for her, but also a community where she found friends and support. Her faith inspired her to help others, and she often participated in charity events organized by the church. When Ashley turned 16, she was already actively involved in volunteer work. She helped elderly members of the community with household chores, organized activities for children, and collected donations for those in need. Her service became more than just an obligation, but a way for her to express her love for people. After graduating from high school, Ashley enrolled at Thompson Rivers University in Kamloops, British Columbia. She chose liberal arts because she wanted to dedicate her life to helping people. Her parents and friends said she had big plans. She dreamed of traveling, learning about different cultures, and perhaps one day working in the field of social assistance. Amidst all of these plans, her family was proud of her accomplishments, but also worried about her safety, especially when Ashley began actively pursuing a romantic relationship with a young man they had never met in person. In 2014, when Ashley was just 12 years old, she met Jack Seppel, a 15-year-old from Chelmsford, UK. Their acquaintance began online, and they quickly found a common language. Despite the age difference and the great distance that separated them, they maintained a friendship that eventually turned into a romantic relationship. Ashley saw Jack as someone who understood her and shared her dreams. She often told her family about how he supported her when she was having a hard time and how they made plans together. However, her parents were cautious about the relationship, realizing that distance and young age could create difficulties. In late 2021, after several years of communication, Ashley made the decision to travel to the UK to meet Jack in person and spend a few months with him. She arranged a 6-month tourist visa and flew to Chelmsford just before Christmas. It was her first serious trip abroad, and she was full of hope for a new chapter in her life. Her parents, Ken and Christy, were concerned about this decision. They knew Ashley was mature and independent, but they felt they couldn't fully trust someone they had never met in person. "We tried to talk to her, but she was so sure of her feelings," her mother recalled in court. "She always believed the best in people." After arriving in Chelmsford, Ashley and Jack rented a 1-bedroom apartment and began their life together. At first, everything seemed perfect. They bought a kitten together named Winston, and Ashley shared pictures with friends of them looking happy. Neighbors also confirmed that the couple initially gave the impression of a harmonious relationship. However, soon signs of tension began to show. Jack, according to neighbors, became increasingly irritable and controlling. Quarrels in their apartment became more and more frequent, and Ashley began to notice that Jack was trying to restrict her freedom. In January 2022, Ashley began sharing her doubts with her mother. She wrote that she no longer felt comfortable and wanted to return home. Her mother immediately sensed that something was wrong, but did not pressure her daughter, hoping that Ashley would make the right decision on her own. Ashley's friends in Canada have also noticed a change in her posts. She became less active on social media and stopped sharing photos. Her tone in conversations became more cautious, as if she was afraid to say something unnecessary. One friend later recalled, "She said she was fine, but I felt like she was hiding something." February 1st, 2022 began as a normal winter day for Chelmsford residents. Ashley's friends from the Mormon Church, who had kept in touch with her through messengers, noticed that she stopped responding to their messages closer to noon. This was unusual for Ashley. She had always tried to stay in touch, especially with those who had helped her through difficult times. When the messages went unread, her friends began to worry. Her close friend who had helped her make plans to return sent several voicemails, but there was no response. By this time, anxiety was beginning to envelope those who knew Ashley was going to be gone. They sensed something was going wrong, but couldn't figure out what. Meanwhile, neighbors living near the couple began to notice the odd behavior. One of them recalled seeing Jack around noon. He seemed calm but aloof. He was walking as if he was in his own thoughts, not paying attention to anyone, the neighbor later recounted. This calmness seemed suspicious, but no one could connect it to the tragedy. Another neighbor mentioned that she heard a woman screaming around 9 a.m., but didn't pay much attention to it. She thought it was just another argument that she was used to by now. By the time the police started questioning her, she realized that those screams might have been the last anyone heard from Ashley. By 3 p.m., Ashley's friends were starting to get seriously worried. They knew she was supposed to get in touch to confirm her plans to return, but her cell phone remained unavailable. A friend who had contacted Ashley's family in Canada suggested contacting the police. It was difficult for them. They were on a different continent, but they realized no one else could help. The decision to contact the police was made by one of Ashley's friends who knew her schedule. She told the operator that Ashley had planned to leave Chelmsford but had suddenly stopped making contact. This was the reason for sending a police squad to the couple's apartment. When police officers arrived at the location, they were confronted with silence. The door was closed, and no one answered the knock. The officers noticed that the windows of the apartment were shaded, and no lights were on inside. This seemed odd given the time of day. Police made the decision to break down the door. What they saw inside shocked even the most experienced officers. There was an ominous atmosphere in the apartment, and everything indicated that something had gone terribly wrong. Things were scattered, and there were footprints on the floor that indicated a struggle, but the main find awaited them in the bedroom. When police officers entered the two-room apartment in one of Chelmsford's quiet streets, they were met with an ominous silence, interrupted only by the sound of footsteps on the carpeted floor. A place that should have been a cozy domestic setting had witnessed a tragedy that left a shocking mark on even the most experienced investigators. The apartment looked like a typical young couple's dwelling. The furniture was modest but cozy, and there were traces of recent life in it. On the kitchen table were unassembled documents, on a chair hung a jacket, and in the corner stood a bowl for a kitten. On closer inspection, however, it was clear that the harmony had been disturbed. Things were scattered all over the apartment as if in a hurry. The police noticed signs of disorder: an overturned chair, a broken lamp, and towels off the rack in the bathroom. On the bedroom floor were shards of a glass vase, as if someone had tried to fight it off. This immediately made investigators realize that there had been a struggle in the apartment. The living room looked relatively quiet, which was misleading at first. The police found an unfinished cup of tea on the coffee table, a book with a page laid down next to it. However, there were stains on the upholstery of the sofa and the carpet, which were later confirmed as traces of blood. The kitten, which the couple got shortly after Ashley arrived in the UK, was nowhere to be seen. Neighbors said the animal had previously been seen running outside, possibly at the peak of the conflict. This added another disturbing element to the overall picture. The main scene of the tragedy was in the bedroom. It was there that the police went after inspecting the first rooms. The officers were greeted by a painting that became the center of their investigation. Ashley's body lay on the bed, her face facing the window and her arms spread unnaturally to her sides. The bed Ashley was resting on was soaked in blood. The blanket and sheets were crumpled, as if someone had tried to cover her but then changed their mind. Investigators noticed cuts in the fabric that matched the pattern of wounds on the victim's body. All of this indicated that the struggle ended here and the assailant made no attempt to cover up his actions. On the floor by the headboard of the bed was a blood-stained knife. It had been left in a position as if the killer had simply abandoned it after completing his gruesome act. Nearby lay a cell phone covered in traces of blood. Forensics would later show that the killer had used it to record a video, which would become one of the key pieces of evidence. On the bedside table was a small bouquet that appeared to have been given to Ashley shortly before her death. This touching element contrasted with the rest of the furnishings, adding to the sense of tragedy. In the corner of the room was Ashley's suitcase, partially filled with belongings, which confirmed her intention to leave the apartment. Investigators observed that many of the belongings were scattered in apparent disarray, indicating the suddenness and intensity of the conflict. However, a somber, almost morbid orderliness remained in some parts of the apartment, including the bathroom and kitchen, as if the killer was trying to maintain the illusion of normalcy after what he had done. Jack Seppel was in the apartment when the officers entered it. He was calm, sitting in the corner of the living room and talking on FaceTime with his sister. He was holding his cell phone in his hands, and he showed no resistance or attempt to leave when police arrived. This indifference to the situation immediately made investigators suspicious. Police later noted that his calmness combined with the chaos at the scene seemed unnatural. He made no attempt to explain or justify anything, only uttering, "I've lost my mind, I'm sorry." These words became the starting point for further investigation. Officers who examined the crime scene described it as one of the most shocking of their careers. Experienced investigators noted that every detail spoke to the methodical and brutal nature of the killer's actions. However, the lack of any attempt to cover his tracks indicated that the crime was not pre-planned, but was the culmination of instant rage. On February 1, 2022, after police discovered Ashley Wadsworth's body in a bedroom, officers immediately arrested her partner, 23-year-old Jack Seppel. Seppel offered no resistance to arrest, allowing police to quickly transport him to the station for initial questioning. After his arrest, Jack Seppel behaved unusually calm. This behavior puzzled investigators, who expected to see signs of fear, confusion, or attempts to justify himself. Instead, he displayed complete indifference to what was happening. He responded briefly in one syllable to questions from officers on the scene, and his general demeanor was alarming to police officers. Initial crime scene footage, including his phrase "one strangled her and stabbed her," became the basis for charges against him. But police realized that more information about his motives, actions, and possible plans would be needed to build a complete case. On the evening of the same day, Seppel was taken to Chelmsford Police Station, where formal interviews began. Investigators sought to reconstruct the chronology of events, understand the motives for the crime, and check his version of events against the facts. From the outset of the interviews, Jack pleaded guilty. "I don't know what came over me. It was sudden," he stated. However, his further answers were contradictory. He claimed that the conflict with Ashley started because of her decision to leave for Canada. That decision, he said, was a blow to him that he couldn't take. When asked why he didn't try to stop her in other ways, Jack was withdrawn and didn't give a clear answer. Investigators noticed that there were occasional signs of aggression in his behavior, especially when it came to his control over the relationship. Investigators asked Jack to describe his actions on the day of the murder. His account began with him and Ashley having an argument in the morning. He accused her of no longer wanting to be with him and tried to get her to change her mind. According to him, she refused to listen and insisted on her decision to leave. He admitted that at one point he lost control of himself. "I just couldn't take it. I wanted her to stay. She was everything to me," he said. His words sounded strange. On the one hand, he showed regret. On the other hand, he did not try to hide his actions. Despite his confession, the police drew attention to some inconsistencies in his testimony. For example, he claimed that he did not remember exactly how the conflict occurred, but his phone records showed that he made a video immediately after the murder detailing his actions. This video became one of the key pieces of evidence against him. In addition, Jack tried to portray his behavior as the result of a sudden emotional outburst. However, testimony from neighbors who heard screaming as early as that morning, as well as evidence of previous incidents of aggression against Ashley, indicated that the violence may have been planned. A psychologist present at the interviews noted that Jack was showing signs of both aggression and aloofness. This combination led investigators to fear that his actions may have been the result of deeper psychological problems, such as pathological jealousy or feelings of possession. Jack Seppel's motives leading up to the murder of Ashley Wadsworth became one of the central questions that investigators sought to answer. From the beginning of the investigation, it was clear that Jack's actions were not only driven by an outburst of rage, but also by deep internal conflicts that ultimately led to the tragedy. A key moment that helped investigators understand Jack's motives was Ashley's decision to leave him and return to Canada. This signaled to him that he was losing control of the situation. Jack, according to friends and neighbors, was a man prone to controlling behavior. He was used to dominating relationships, and Ashley's attempt to free himself from his influence caused him to become enraged and feel powerless. In interviews, Jack admitted that the prospect of losing Ashley had become unbearable for him. He said, "I couldn't imagine my life without her. I felt betrayed." This sense of betrayal was the catalyst for his actions that developed on that fateful day. Psychological experts involved in the investigation noted that Jack did not view Ashley as an equal partner, but rather as property. This manifested itself in his controlling behavior. He restricted her contact with friends, monitored her movements, and tried to influence her decisions. Ashley, realizing this, began to distance herself from him, which only increased his jealousy. Testimony from neighbors confirmed that Jack often became aggressive when he felt he was losing control over Ashley. For example, he took her desire to return home to Canada as a personal betrayal, even though she made it clear that she no longer felt comfortable in their relationship. Investigators also considered the possibility that Jack's actions were motivated by his fear of being alone. He did not have strong social ties, and his relationship with Ashley was his only source of emotional stability. When she decided to leave him, Jack felt he was losing everything. In one of his interviews, he said, "I didn't know how to live without her. I felt like no one else wanted me." This fear of loneliness was probably reinforced by his previous failed relationships, in which he was also violent. Incidents of harassment and violation of a restraining order against other women showed that Jack had a long history of problems with emotional regulation. As the relationship between Jack and Ashley became more strained, his behavior became more unpredictable. Neighbors mentioned that in the final weeks before the murder, they heard them arguing more and more frequently. Jack used yelling, threats, and even physical violence to keep Ashley close. When it became clear that she had made the final decision to return home, the conflict reached its climax. For Jack, it was the moment he realized he could no longer control her, and it led to his fateful decision. Jack's motives were deeply selfish. He could not accept the fact that Ashley could leave and build a new life without him. His actions on the day of the tragedy showed that he was willing to destroy everything just to prevent her from leaving. It was an act of not only violence but an attempt to finally assert his dominance, even at the cost of her life. Based on the initial interviews and the evidence gathered, the police filed a formal charge of premeditated murder. The trial began in May 2022, a few months after the tragedy. Jack Seppel was charged with premeditated murder, and his lawyers pleaded guilty to their client's charges, which avoided a protracted trial. However, a trial was needed to determine the punishment and give Ashley's family a chance to have their say. Crown Prosecutor Simon Spence presented the case with a detailed statement of facts. He began with a chronology of events, describing how the relationship between Jack and Ashley escalated into control and violence, culminating in the murder on February 1st, 2022. The prosecutor characterized Seppel's actions as cruel and cowardly and emphasized that his rage was triggered by Ashley's decision to leave him and return to Canada. The prosecutor's office presented substantial evidence that demonstrated the premeditation and cruelty of Jack Seppel's actions. Among them were a video taken by the accused. In a video taken immediately after the murder, Jack is covered in Ashley's blood and apologizes for what he did. This video not only confirmed his guilt, but also showed a lack of remorse or realization of the consequences of his actions. Crime scene confessions. When police arrived at the scene, Jack calmly said, "I've lost my mind, I'm sorry. I strangled her and stabbed her." These words were recorded by officers and became one of the central pieces of evidence for the prosecution. Neighbors' testimony. Neighbors testified that they heard Ashley screaming the day she died. One neighbor also saw her in hysterics shortly before the murder, when Ashley admitted that Jack hit her and threw the kitten against the wall. Forensics. Experts recorded more than 90 stab wounds on Ashley's body, as well as injuries typical of self-defense. These data confirmed that the girl fought for her life to the last. The defendant's history of violence. The prosecutor noted that Jack had a long history of controlling and violent behavior, including attacking former partners and his own mother. Defense attorney Christopher Paxton attempted to mitigate the sentence, saying the murder occurred amid an emotional breakdown and the defendant's inability to cope with a broken relationship. He presented Jack as someone who was emotionally unstable and acted impulsively. It was a moment of complete despair when he lost control of himself, Paxton said. However, these arguments were rejected by the court because the evidence indicated that Seppel's actions were not an accident, but the result of his pathological desire for control. One of the most emotional moments of the trial was the testimony of Ashley's parents, who flew in from Canada to attend the trial. They gave statements that revealed the depth of their pain and loss. "This is a nightmare that, thanks to you, Jack, we will never wake up from. You stole our daughter from us. Her life was a light to all of us, and you destroyed everything she was building. Your cruelty and selfishness has left us in a void that nothing can fill. I didn't want her to go to England, but she was an adult and had the right to make her own decisions. She saw things in you that we didn't. We realize now that her trust cost her her life. Jack, you must realize the pain you have caused our family. We will carry this burden for the rest of our lives." These words spoken in the courtroom emphasized the magnitude of the tragedy and its impact on Ashley's loved ones. During the Ashley family statements, Jack Seppel remained impassive. His face expressed no emotion, which only reinforced the impression of his equanimity. The judge noted this behavior as further evidence of his danger to the community. After weeks of hearings, the judge, the Honorable Murray, handed down the verdict. He called Jack Seppel's actions a brutal and cowardly attack and emphasized that the murder was committed with knowledge and intent. The judge added, "You inflicted more than 90 wounds on the body of a young woman who trusted you. You robbed her of her future and destroyed her family's lives." Jack Seppel was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum sentence of 23 years and 6 months. This means that he will not be able to apply for parole until that time has elapsed. Boston, one of America's oldest cities, was not just a place rich in history, but a vibrant center of New England cultural and business life. Its winding streets, old brick houses, and modern skyscrapers created a unique flavor that attracted tourists and locals alike. From the famous Boston Tea Party to Victorian-era architecture, the city was proud of its past. But behind this beautiful picture, there was another side to it. Some neighborhoods, such as Mission Hill, known for its historic buildings, suffered from poverty and social inequality. This mixture of traditional and modern prosperity and hardship created a unique but sometimes tense atmosphere. It was here, in this multifaceted city, that Charles and Carol Stewart lived, a couple who seemed to fit perfectly into the image of a successful and happy family. Their lives were seemingly flawless. Charles, general manager at the prestigious Edward F. Son's first salon on fashionable Newbury Street, stood out for his charm, energy, and confidence. Tall, well-built, he looked like he was destined for success. His colleagues and friends admired his leadership skills and his ability to get along with people. Charles was a man who knew how to impress, and his life reflected this. A nice home, a prestigious job, a caring wife. He seemed to have achieved what many only aspired to. Carol, his wife, was quite different in personality, but that was what made their couple so harmonious. Working as a tax attorney, she always had a way with people, for which she was appreciated by her clients and colleagues. She was described as a kind, caring, and incredibly patient woman. She knew how to listen, support, and create an atmosphere of warmth around her. For Charles, she was not only a wife, but a friend who supported him in all his endeavors. Carol was 7 months pregnant, and this expectation became the central event in their lives. The baby-to-be was to be their first, and they prepared for its birth with trepidation. Carol loved to tell her friends about how she and Charles were choosing a name, setting up the nursery, and buying everything they needed. Her face lit up when she talked about the baby-to-be. "Charlie is going to be a wonderful father," she often repeated. Their loved ones could be seen looking forward to holding the baby in their arms. Charles, too, was actively involved in preparing for the big event. Despite his busy job, he found time to accompany Carol to courses for expectant parents. Together they learned how to swaddle the baby, how to cope with the first difficulties. Their smiles and laughter filled the room at the classes, and the other couples couldn't help but notice how much they loved each other. The night of October 23, 1989 was one of the most tragic and mysterious nights in Boston's history. On that cold autumn evening, the silence of the Mission Hill neighborhood was broken by a 911 call. The voice on the other end of the line was weak and shaky, a man, barely containing his pain, reporting that he and his pregnant wife had been attacked in a car. His words were brief but startling. "We were attacked. My wife is hurt. She's pregnant. Please help." It was Charles Stewart, husband of 30-year-old Carol Stewart, who was expecting their firstborn. Dispatchers instantly relayed the call to police patrols who were on duty in the Mission Hill neighborhood at the time. Using the landmarks given by Charles, officers began combing the area. They turned on their sirens so Charles could hear them approaching and help pinpoint his location. After a few minutes, the officers noticed headlights shining through the thick darkness of one of the narrow streets. As they got closer, they found a white sedan parked at the curb with its doors open. The picture they saw was horrifying. Inside the vehicle was Carol, who was unconscious but still alive. Her shirt was soaked with blood, and her breathing was becoming increasingly faint. In the driver's seat, badly injured, sat Charles. He was holding his stomach, his face contorted in pain. The police officers immediately called an ambulance and tried to administer first aid themselves. Carol was moved onto a stretcher and rushed to the hospital, Brigham and Women's Hospital, where doctors began a desperate fight for her life and the life of her baby. Charles, despite his serious condition, was conscious. He told police that they were attacked by an unknown male, an African American who opened the driver's door, demanded money, and then began shooting. He said the assailant was wearing dark clothing and quickly fled after the attack, leaving them in the car. Police officers immediately began scouring the neighborhood looking for the suspect. Crime was not uncommon in Mission Hill, a neighborhood with an already troubled reputation, and the report of an armed attack only heightened anxiety among residents. The neighborhood was surrounded by patrols that interviewed locals, but there were no eyewitnesses to the attack. Meanwhile, doctors at the hospital were doing everything they could to save Carol. Her condition was critical. The bullet had caused severe damage to her internal organs and the blood loss was significant. Doctors performed an emergency C-section to try to save the baby. The boy, named Christopher, was born prematurely but survived despite his serious condition. However, Carol's own life could not be saved. Hours after the attack, she passed away, leaving her husband and newborn son behind. The police thoroughly examined the crime scene. A car parked at the curb became a key focus of the investigation. 3 bullets were found in the interior of the car, 2 of which struck the seats and 1 lodged in the trim. The weapon used by the perpetrator was believed to be a .38 caliber handgun. There were large blood stains on the front seats and floor of the vehicle, indicating the extent of the injuries sustained by the couple. Forensic examiners recovered fingerprints found on the door handle and driver's door glass. However, their identity could not be determined at the time of examination. Police also found shoe tracks on the ground near the car that indicated someone had been standing at the driver's door. These clues became the first links in the chain of investigation. News of the attack spread quickly throughout Boston. The brutality of the crime, the fact that the victim was a young pregnant woman, and the tragic death of her child caused shock and outrage among the city's residents. Bostonians demanded that the police immediately solve the case and catch the perpetrator. Mission Hill, already considered an unsafe neighborhood, became the focus of attention. Police stepped up patrols and mass checks began, especially among the African American population, as Charles indicated that the assailant was black. This sparked outrage among the residents of the neighborhood who felt they were being unfairly accused. Based on Charles' testimony, the police made an initial version of the crime. They suggested that the attack could have been related to a robbery, as the perpetrator, according to Charles, demanded money. However, the absence of signs of theft and the fact that the money and valuables were left in the car put this version in doubt. Investigators began checking for criminal activity in the area where the attack occurred. They focused on suspects already known to police for involvement in robberies and armed assaults. However, no serious leads emerged in the early stages of the investigation. Despite Charles' statements and the evidence found, investigators began to have questions. Some details of Charles' testimony seemed odd. For example, he claimed that the assailant acted confidently, as if he was familiar with the area, but police could find no eyewitnesses or other signs of a bystander's presence at the time. In addition, none of the nearby CATV cameras recorded anything suspicious. What also caught the investigators' attention was Charles' own behavior. Although his injury was serious, he appeared collected enough to get to the phone and call the police. This fact raised doubts, especially considering that Carol was in critical condition at that moment. After the tragic attack on Charles and Carol Stewart, which ended in Carol's death, the Boston police immediately launched an investigation. They relied on the testimony of Charles, who survived the attack. His account of the attacker, an African-American man with a husky voice, dressed in a tracksuit, became the starting point for finding a suspect. That description, though fairly general, set the investigation in a certain direction that, as soon became clear, produced a host of consequences. Police mobilized significant resources to search for the alleged perpetrator. The focus was on the Mission Hill neighborhood where the attack occurred. The neighborhood already had a reputation for high crime, and police focused their efforts on finding anyone matching Charles' description there. Officers began conducting increased patrols and stops for searches. African Americans, especially those who were out late at night, became a prime target for searches. The decision sparked controversy among local residents who began to express their displeasure. Many argued that the police actions were based solely on racial stereotypes and not on actual evidence. The situation became increasingly tense, but the police continued to follow Charles' version of events, looking at any leads. This tactic led to numerous searches and arrests. People matching the description could be stopped on the street or called in for questioning. One Mission Hill resident who was detained for questioning later stated, "I don't feel safe even being in my home. They came to me without explanation just because I look like the person they are looking for." A few days after the attack, police arrested a man they believed matched the description of the assailant. He turned out to be William Willie Bennett, a resident of Roxbury, a Boston neighborhood known for its social problems. Bennett was known to the police because of his criminal reputation. He had multiple convictions for misdemeanor assault and disorderly conduct. When he was apprehended, Bennett was heavily intoxicated, making interrogation nearly impossible. He was confused in his testimony, denied any involvement in the attack, and could not give clear answers to the investigators' questions. This, however, did not stop the police from continuing to check his alibi and look for evidence linking him to the crime. Despite all efforts, a link between Bennett and the attack on the Stewarts was never established. No weapon matching the description was found, nor were any witnesses found to corroborate his involvement in the crime. A few days later, Bennett was released from custody. The episode sparked widespread criticism of the police. Journalists and activists questioned whether such detentions were justified and whether Boston's African Americans were being victimized by bias and stereotyping. Amid racial unrest and public discontent, police continued to work. Large-scale searches and interrogations conducted in Mission Hill and other neighborhoods drew criticism from civil rights activists. Leaders in Boston's African American community accused law enforcement of unfairly targeting people based only on their race. Meanwhile, local newspapers and television fueled interest in the case. Reports of raids, detentions, and interrogations became commonplace on news broadcasts. The public demanded results from the police, but the investigation progressed slowly. To many, it seemed strange that in a city with a sophisticated law enforcement system, an attack of this magnitude would go unsolved. Realizing that there was no evidence against the suspect and the investigation was stalled, police turned their attention to digging deeper into Charles' testimony. Investigators began looking into his financial situation and relationship with his wife to see if there might have been ulterior motives that could have changed the course of the case. Charles' financial records received particular attention. The police discovered that shortly before the attack he had increased the amount of Carol's insurance policy. This looked suspicious, but there was not yet enough evidence to officially treat him as a suspect. By this point, the case had begun to splinter the investigation into two groups. Some officers continued to believe the version of the attack by an unknown assailant, while others began to seriously consider the possibility that the attack was staged. However, at this stage, there was no direct evidence to confirm Charles' involvement. Police continued to interview his friends, colleagues, and relatives to better understand his behavior and motives. But despite growing suspicions, Charles remained a key witness, and the investigation could not formally charge him without hard evidence. The investigation into the tragic murder of Carol Stewart took an unexpected turn when Charles Stewart's younger brother, Matthew Stewart, decided to report to police in January 1990. This came amid mounting pressure from investigators who were increasingly doubtful of Charles' original version of events. Matthew's confession not only turned the tide of the case, but was the beginning of the exposure of a carefully planned crime. Matthew came to the police station voluntarily, claiming that he had something to tell about Carol's murder. The investigators, who already had suspicions about Charles, were surprised by his statement. During questioning, he revealed that on the night of the murder, Charles had asked him for help. His brother had called him late that night and asked him to meet him at a specified location. Matthew, not realizing the seriousness of what was going on, agreed. According to him, Charles handed him a bag with his belongings, saying that he had to get rid of it. He reasoned that the bag contained items that could compromise him if they fell into the wrong hands. Matthew, without asking any questions, took the bag without even looking at what was in it. Later, when the police questioned Matthew in detail about the contents of the bag, he recalled that it contained Carol's wedding ring, her wallet, several small personal items, and a gun. That gun, as it later turned out, was the very gun that had been used to shoot Carol and Charles. Matthew described how he threw the bag into the Mystic River following his brother's instructions. At the time, he did not realize that he was becoming involved in a serious crime. He believed he was simply helping his brother avoid any trouble related to their family or personal lives. After Matthew's confession, the police immediately organized an operation to search for the bag in the Mystic River. Forensic experts, using Matthew's statement, identified the location where he had dumped the bag. Divers worked for several days until they finally found an object matching the description. The contents of the bag were shocking evidence. It did contain items that belonged to Carol, including her wedding ring. But the big discovery was the gun. Experts confirmed that it matched in caliber and type to the one used in the attack. It was the crucial link that linked the staged attack to Charles himself. After the discovery of the bag and the evidence, the police reviewed all of Charles' statements. The version of the stranger attack that he had so confidently maintained began to crumble. At this stage, the investigation already realized that the attack could have been carefully planned by Charles in order to kill his wife and cover up his actions. Charles' financial affairs attracted particular attention from the police. It turned out that shortly before the murder, he had increased Carol's insurance policy by a significant amount. This created a possible motive. Charles could count on the payout to cover his financial problems. In addition, it turned out that their marriage was not as serene as it seemed. Close friends of the couple said that Charles had relationship problems with Carol, as well as doubts about their future child. Although Matthew claimed that he had no suspicion of Charles' real intent, his actions made him an unwitting accomplice. Not only did he help dispose of evidence, but he remained silent about his actions for months after the crime. When asked by investigators why he didn't report it sooner, Matthew said he was afraid of betraying his brother and didn't realize the magnitude of what had happened. His confession showed how much Charles manipulated the people around him. Even his closest relatives did not suspect that behind the facade of a successful and caring man hid a calculating killer. By the time the police began questioning Charles, his behavior had changed dramatically. He became withdrawn and avoided talking to the police. Investigators noticed that he avoided direct answers and tried to turn the conversation to other topics. But the pressure continued to mount, and Charles realized that the truth would soon come out. When the police officially notified Charles that an investigation had been launched against him on suspicion of Carol's murder, he suddenly disappeared. A few days later, his body was found under the Tobin Bridge in Boston. Charles had committed suicide by jumping into the river. In the note he left behind, he did not admit his guilt, but expressed regret for his actions and the pain he had caused his family. Matthew Stewart's confession and the evidence uncovered was pivotal in reconstructing the true picture of events. It exposed a carefully planned crime in which Charles, in order to kill his wife and stage the attack, did not stop at using his brother and manipulating the entire police system. After Charles Stewart's suicide, public and law enforcement attention turned to his younger brother, Matthew Stewart. His confession that he helped cover up evidence became the basis for the trial. The case not only put Matthew in the spotlight, but also forced the court to consider where the line between unwitting complicity and deliberate acts in aid of the perpetrator lies. Matthew Stewart voluntarily reported to the police in January 1990 and told them that on the night of the murder his brother had asked for help. Charles telephoned Matthew and asked him to meet him at a specified location. When he arrived, Charles handed him the bag and told him it had to be thrown away. Matthew claimed that he did not know that the bag contained a gun and Carol's personal belongings, which would later become key evidence. At trial, Matthew gave a detailed account of the events of that night. He admitted that he threw the bag into the Mystic River following his brother's instructions. He explained his actions by saying that at the time he did not realize the magnitude of what was happening. To him, it looked like a request for help from a relative in a difficult situation. However, prosecutors argued that even without knowing the details, Matthew should have realized that he was helping to cover up something illegal. His actions related to the destruction of evidence significantly hampered the investigation, allowing Charles to stage a version of the attack and deceive the investigation. Matthew's trial began in June 1990 and attracted enormous public attention. Against the background of already known details of the crime associated with Charles, many perceived Matthew either as a victim of his brother's manipulations or as an active participant in covering up the crime. Prosecutors sought to show that Matthew's actions, even if not intentional, constituted a serious violation of the law. They focused on his failure to contact the police immediately after realizing that the bag he threw away might be connected to the crime. On the other hand, the defense argued that Matthew was acting on his brother's instructions and had neither the time nor the opportunity to realize that he was becoming an accomplice in covering up the murder. Carol Stewart's relatives spoke during the trial, calling for a harsh punishment for Matthew. They believed his actions, albeit unintentional, played a major role in the truth about the crime not being revealed immediately. One of Carol's brothers said, "Every action has consequences. We lost our sister and her baby. Anyone who was involved must be held accountable." The trial also included testimony from friends and family members of the Stewart family who described Charles as manipulative. This testimony helped the defense argue that Matthew may have been misled and didn't realize he was doing his brother's request related to the murder. After several weeks of deliberation, the court reached a verdict. On July 27, 1990, Matthew Stewart was found guilty of obstruction of justice. The court took into account his cooperation with the police, his voluntary confession, and his lack of direct involvement in the planning of the crime. However, it was also noted that his actions in destroying evidence had a significant impact on the investigation. Matthew was sentenced to 3 years imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 1.5 years. The judge emphasized that both mitigating and aggravating circumstances were taken into account in sentencing. The story of the relationship between Travis Alexander and Jodi Arias began as a romantic fairy tale, but ended in a tragedy that shook not only their neighborhood, but the entire country. They met in 2006 at a professional conference in Las Vegas, and their connection immediately escalated to an intense, passionate level. Jodi, an attractive and confident young woman, quickly won Travis over. He, a successful salesman and active participant in the Mormon Church, was a man of purpose and respect in the community. Their first meetings were filled with romance and emotional intimacy, and Travis's friends commented that he seemed happy and inspired by this new love. However, significant contradictions soon began to appear between them. Despite their strong physical attraction and shared interests, their approaches to life and even their relationship goals were very different. Travis, raised in the strict moral traditions of the Mormon Church, was focused on a serious relationship with the goal of creating a family that matched his values. He was convinced that his chosen one should share his worldview and faith. Jody, on the other hand, was a person with a more open view of the world and relationships, and her casualness, which Travis found attractive in the beginning, became a source of anxiety for him over time. Although she made attempts to adapt to his lifestyle, even adopting some of the rules expected of women in their community. The change was not genuine, and her true feelings and ambitions soon became apparent. The first serious rift between them occurred when Travis began to express doubts about the compatibility of their views. He realized that the profound differences in their worldviews and approaches to life could be a serious obstacle to a long-term relationship. Jody, for her part, couldn't or wouldn't understand this. She perceived Travis's comments as attempts to criticize her or as a sign that he was no longer as attached to her as he used to be. Amidst this tension, the relationship began to show signs of emotional pressure. Jody began to exhibit obsessive behavior and regularly demanded explanations from Travis. Over time, Jody's behavior became even more controlling and persistent. She became increasingly attached to Travis and began to exhibit jealousy that knew no bounds. She followed him on social media, checked his messages, and even visited him unannounced. Travis complained to friends that he felt more trapped every day. Travis's friends and co-workers, who observed their relationship from the sidelines, noted that he gradually lost interest and desire to keep in touch, especially when Jody began to control every aspect of his life. He shared with his loved ones that he was finding it increasingly difficult to stay in the relationship, but at the same time, he feared that a breakup might cause an unpredictable reaction from Jody. Nevertheless, he tried to keep his distance by talking about the breakup more and more often. Each time he suggested ending the relationship, Jody reassured him that she could change and adapt to his demands. She said she was willing to follow Mormon customs and accept his faith if it would help their relationship grow stronger. At one point, she did make an attempt to join his religious community, and Travis even gave her a chance to prove that she was serious. As time went on, however, he became more and more convinced that her changes were temporary and did not reflect her true character. These differences caused growing tension and confrontation between them. Increasingly convinced that they could not build a healthy relationship, Travis decided to make a final breakup. He informed Jody of his intention to cut off all contact and move to another city. This decision was not an easy one for him, but he was sure it was the best thing for both of them. His friends and family supported him in this decision, noting that Jody was becoming increasingly clingy and that her behavior was going beyond the bounds of a healthy relationship. But Jody was not ready to accept this breakup. She continued to obsess, trying to contact him and looking for any way she could to regain his favor. After the breakup, she still found ways to communicate by visiting Travis, sending messages, and trying to convince him to start over. Her obsessive behavior became increasingly disturbing to Travis and his entourage as her attempts to re-establish contact became increasingly desperate and emotionally unstable. Their conflict culminated on the night of June 4th, 2008, when Jody, unwilling to come to terms with her loss, made a fateful decision. On June 4th, 2008, Travis Alexander's home, quiet and comfortable like most homes on his block, became the scene of a horrific tragedy. It all started when Travis's friends became concerned because of his sudden disappearance. Travis was usually active in his social connections, frequently texting, calling, and checking in regularly, but this time he disappeared without a trace. After receiving no response from him to calls and texts, friends traveled to his home to see if he was okay. What they discovered not only shocked them, but was the beginning of a massive investigation. When Travis's friends entered his home, they immediately felt alarmed. The house was strangely quiet, and at first glance, everything looked familiar. However, when they reached the bathroom, they saw something they could not have imagined. Travis was lying dead in the shower, and there were numerous traces of blood on the floor and walls. They immediately called the police, and officers and forensics soon arrived on the scene. Upon arrival at the scene, the police immediately cordoned off the house to begin an inspection and record every detail that could shed light on what had happened. The presence of blood on the bathroom walls and floor indicated that a scene of brutal violence had been played out in the house. Travis's body was in the shower stall. Its position and visible injuries spoke of a serious and sustained assault. Police officers immediately noted that the nature of the injuries and marks on the body indicated something more than just a physical struggle or a random altercation. A premeditated and violent crime had taken place here. Investigators began an examination of the premises, paying attention to the smallest details to get a full picture of what may have happened in this house on the night of the tragedy. Numerous bloodstains were visible on the bathroom walls and floor, some of which stretched all the way to the bedroom, as if Travis had attempted to leave or flee from his attacker before being finally caught in the shower room. This arrangement of footprints indicated a physical struggle and movement, leading police to believe that the attack began in one of the rooms and ended in the bathroom. As investigators recorded the evidence, it became clear to them that there was another party in the house, for the mere presence of blood and signs of struggle suggested that Travis was not alone at that fateful moment. During the examination of the premises, marks were found in the bathroom and bedroom that indicated the use of a knife, as the traces of blood and the nature of the wounds on the body indicated multiple stabbings. Medics on the scene and experts involved in analyzing the body confirmed that Travis had suffered over 25 stab wounds. This number of wounds spoke of not just an attack, but an extremely aggressive and emotionally charged attack. Among the injuries were severe cuts to his hands and forearms, indicating that Travis was attempting to defend himself from the attack. Multiple wounds aimed at vital organs, such as the chest and abdomen, indicated a deliberate desire to cause serious harm or death. But that wasn't all. In addition to the stab wounds, Travis's body showed signs of gunshot wounds. One shot had been fired to the head, leading investigators to believe that the perpetrator of the attack intended to make sure that Travis would definitely not survive. The combination of so many stab wounds and gunfire reinforced police suspicions that this was an elaborate murder with a personal motive. This level of brutality and desire for a final outcome was unusual for crimes committed in a fit of anger or self-defense. It suggested that the killer was driven not just by aggression, but by something deeper, probably personal motives or a desire for revenge. During an examination of the scene, a digital camera was found in the washing machine, which the perpetrator had apparently tried to destroy, probably assuming that there might be evidence left on it. Police officers immediately seized the camera and turned it over to specialists for data recovery. And as it turned out, the camera had saved several images that helped the investigation recreate the last moments of Travis's life. The photos found in the camera's memory captured scenes taken in the bathroom that day. Early shots showed Travis in the shower, ordinary moments of everyday life. But the latest shots, hazy and blurry, were taken while he was moving, as if someone had dropped the camera. These shots seemed particularly important to investigators because they also showed Jody, confirming her presence at the scene at the time of Travis's death. Photographic experts reconstructed the images from the camera and concluded that Jody was not just a guest, but had been by Travis's side in his final moments. This became one of the key clues linking her to the crime scene. The attempt to destroy the camera by sending it to the washing machine showed that the killer had acted with the intention of covering his tracks. The photos themselves were not only proof of its presence, but also indicated that the crime was planned. After all, if it had happened by accident, there would have been no need to destroy the evidence. Soon after, the forensic team discovered other clues that finally led them to Jody. Traces of blood were found in the house that indicated the presence of another person. DNA analysis conducted on the biological traces found revealed that the samples belonged to Jodi Arias. This result further strengthened the suspicions of the investigation, confirming that Jodi was not just in Travis's house, but was involved in the incident. In addition to the blood, experts recorded fingerprints that were also identified as belonging to Jodi. This evidence became the basis for future prosecution as it proved her physical presence and actions at the crime scene. Investigators began analyzing statements from witnesses, friends, and co-workers of Travis to better understand his relationship with Jodi and the motives that may have been behind her actions. They quickly discovered that Travis and Jodi's relationship was not just complicated but often toxic. Close friends of Travis told police that since their breakup, Jodi had been persistent and even aggressive on more than one occasion. She repeatedly showed up at his house unannounced, tried to control his personal life, and was unwilling to accept the breakup. Of particular importance to the investigation was the fact that Travis, in the last months before his death, began to openly tell his friends that he feared Jodi. According to them, he felt that Jodi would not be able to accept his decision to break up and described her behavior as compulsive. This led investigators to speculate that Jodi may have had a motive for the attack. She couldn't bear the thought of Travis walking out of her life and their romantic relationship ending for good. In addition, Travis's friends recalled that he was going on a trip with his friends from church and was even planning a new romantic encounter with another woman. According to them, this could have been a major blow to Jodi, especially if she still had feelings for him. Some of the friends even mentioned that Jodi found out about these plans, which they believe strengthened her resolve to not let Travis move on without her. In the face of this evidence, which only confirmed Jodi's zealous and obsessive behavior, investigators began to build a clearer picture of her motivation. They speculated that she may have viewed the attack as an extreme step to regain control of the situation and prevent Travis from starting a new life. However, to be fully convinced of this theory, the investigation needed concrete evidence and testimony from Jodi herself, who at the time denied her presence at the scene of the crime. After weeks of intense investigation, evidence testing, and interrogations, Jodi Arias was arrested on charges of the premeditated murder of Travis Alexander. During the investigation was able to gather enough evidence that pointed to her involvement and showed that the attack was carefully thought out and prepared. The moment Jodi was arrested, the case gained even more publicity, and soon the news about it traveled the country, causing a nationwide discussion. For investigators, Jodi's arrest was a major milestone in the case. From the very beginning of the investigation, the police were faced with confusing testimony and conflicting versions of events that Jodi gave during interrogations. The police suspected her involvement, but the lack of a clear picture of her motives, the nature of their relationship, and Jodi's seemingly nonchalant demeanor made it difficult to build a case. But now, with all the evidence collected and the expert findings, they could begin active preparations for the trial. At the time of her arrest, Jodi was remarkably calm. She didn't look scared or remorseful. Her face maintained a serene expression, and the way she spoke to the police was more like talking to old acquaintances than to those arresting her for suspicion of murder. This level of confidence and composure was uncharacteristic of suspects in such serious crimes. Police officers noted that Jodi acted as if she believed her arrest was only a temporary misunderstanding that she would soon be able to explain. Jodi's first interviews after her arrest became an important source of information for the investigators, and her behavior only served to increase their confidence in her involvement. During the interrogations, Jodi initially categorically denied her presence at Travis's house on the night of the murder, claiming that she was elsewhere and could not have been involved in the tragedy. She provided a false alibi in an attempt to convince investigators that she had no reason to be with Travis that day. However, when police presented her with evidence, including camera photos of her in his home at the time of the murder, Jodi began to change her testimony. Realizing that it was futile to deny her presence, Jodi changed her story and stated that she was at Travis's house, but their encounter was not violent. She began to tell a new story where their encounter was supposedly peaceful and calm. At this point, investigators noticed that Jody was changing the details of her story in response to the evidence presented, as if she was adapting to the information the investigators had. Each time she was shown new evidence or testimony, she would adjust her story in an attempt to explain her actions, but her version became more and more confusing and illogical. During interrogations, Jody began to resort to manipulation, trying to evoke sympathy and even pity from the investigators. She claimed that she felt a strong affection for Travis and tried to explain that their relationship was full of contradictions and that her behavior was the result of emotional tension. At one point, she began to reveal that she had mixed feelings of love and frustration, which she said made their relationship difficult and led to misunderstandings. However, her words did not explain why she stabbed Travis more than 25 times and fired a gunshot into his head. Investigators saw that Jody was trying to play the role of a victim of circumstance, but her version was inconsistent with evidence that pointed to her active participation in the tragedy. The key element that definitively incriminated Jody was photographs from a digital camera found in the washing machine. During questioning, investigators showed her photos taken on the day of the murder. These images captured Travis's final moments, footage of him in the shower, followed by several indistinct photos taken during the struggle, and final shots that captured the moments after the attack. When Jody was shown these images, she tried to explain them, claiming that they were just taking pictures and that there was nothing criminal in the footage. However, investigators knew that the camera had been placed in the washing machine precisely to destroy evidence, indicating an attempt to cover up the crime. Each time investigators presented Jody with new evidence, her version of events changed, and her stories became more and more contradictory. When asked why she made the attempt to get rid of the camera, Jody was unable to answer convincingly, switching topics again. She tried to turn the conversation to the peculiarities of her relationship with Travis, talked about her experiences and difficulties, but the investigators saw that all her words were just an attempt to avoid the truth. When it became clear that her testimony was completely unreliable, investigators decided to charge Jody. She was arrested on a charge of premeditated murder. It was important to the police and prosecutors that her own testimony and her attempts to create a false alibi became evidence against herself. At every stage of the interrogation, she confused her testimony, and psychology experts involved in the investigation drew attention to her attempts to manipulate the investigation. The experts noted that Jody tried to evoke pity from the investigators by appealing to her feelings and relationship problems, but her story became increasingly artificial and inconsistent. Jody's behavior during the interrogations attracted the attention not only of the investigators, but also of psychologists who became interested in understanding her motivation and the reasons for such equanimity. Experts noted that her reaction to the accusations was atypical. She did not express obvious signs of fear or regret and behaved more like she was trying to maintain control over the situation. In one of the interrogations, she even allowed herself to smile as she talked about her feelings for Travis, which puzzled the investigators. They saw this as not just confidence, but rather an attempt to hide her true emotions, to give the impression that she did not realize the gravity of her actions. Psychologists noted that such behavior may indicate a deep psychological conflict and an attempt to control her emotions, which may have been out of control at the time of the crime. During the interrogations and interactions with the police, Jody repeatedly suggested that she was just trying to protect herself. At one point, she stated that Travis had allegedly become aggressive and that her actions were motivated by self-defense. However, the nature of the wounds and the marks at the crime scene did not support this version. Experts concluded that her story of self-defense is another attempt to avoid responsibility and present herself as a victim. Ultimately, investigators were able to determine that Jody acted deliberately and attempted to conceal her presence at the crime scene. They found that she traveled a significant distance to Travis's home without informing anyone she knew of her plans and attempted to destroy evidence, including a camera with photographs. This confirmed that she had carefully considered her actions and was aware of what she was doing. Jody's arrest and subsequent charges generated a great deal of media and public interest. The story of a romantic relationship that turned violent and ended in murder quickly became the subject of national discussion. Jody's image as an attractive and intelligent young woman contrasted with the gruesome details of the case, which heightened interest in her identity. Soon her name was known throughout the country, and the public followed every new twist and turn of the case. Jodi Arias, who seemed so confident and cool-headed during her interrogations, found herself at the center of one of the most high-profile trials of the decade. The trial of Jodi Arias began in 2013 and quickly caught the attention of the general public, becoming one of the most high-profile cases in the United States. Interest in the case was sparked by the unusual nature of the crime, the tumultuous history between Jodi and Travis, and the numerous contradictions in her testimony. Broadcasts from the courtroom, discussions on television and in print, made Jodi Arias a figure that was discussed everywhere. The public was intrigued. How could a young and attractive woman commit such a brutal crime? The prosecuting attorney immediately took a hard line, insisting that the murder of Travis Alexander had been carefully planned. He emphasized that Jodi had arrived at Travis's house deliberately and carried out the attack out of jealousy and a desire to maintain control of the situation. The prosecution presented the evidence gathered. Photographs of Jodi at Travis's home on the night of the murder, her DNA traces found at the crime scene, and multiple stab wounds that indicated an emotional component to the attack. The prosecutor, addressing the jury, noted, "This number of wounds, plus a gunshot to the head, is not self-defense. This is cold-blooded murder." The prosecution's opening statement was brief but powerful, and immediately shaped the prosecutor's position that Jodi acted deliberately. The prosecutor detailed how the nature of the injuries and the sequence of events indicated that Jodi put her plan into action, leaving Travis no chance of escape. He also referred to her repeated attempts to conceal her presence, including trying to delete photographs and hiding the camera in the washing machine. According to the prosecution, this confirmed that Jodi was aware of her guilt and was trying to hide all evidence. The defense built its strategy on trying to portray Jodi as the victim of an abusive relationship. The defense argued that Jodi acted in self-defense and was forced to defend herself because, according to her, Travis was aggressive on more than one occasion. During the trial, Jodi's attorneys stated that she was afraid of Travis and was in a difficult relationship from which she could not find a way out. They claimed that Travis put psychological pressure on her, causing her to have to defend herself on that fateful day. Jodi, according to the lawyers, was under serious emotional strain and could not control her actions. In her defense, Jodi herself appeared in court, testifying for 18 days. She described their relationship in detail, recounting how Travis allegedly humiliated and manipulated her. In her testimony, she portrayed herself as the victim, claiming their relationship was filled with violence and threats, and that she felt her life was threatened. According to her, the murder was the result of a sudden act of self-defense, and she did not intend to harm Travis, but was forced to defend herself. However, the evidence presented by the prosecution told a different story. Investigators and experts invited to the trial explained that the nature of the wounds did not fit a typical case of self-defense. More than 25 stab wounds, as well as a gunshot to the head, were clear signs of excessive violence that could not be explained by the defense. Psychologists involved in the case also noted that such aggression often indicates strong emotional distress, such as jealousy or a desire for punishment rather than fear for one's life. The prosecutor, in turn, tried to show the jury that Jodi's story of self-defense was fictitious and intended solely to avoid punishment. He called attention to her conflicting testimony and the fact that she changed her story in different interrogations. He reminded the court of how Jodi initially denied her presence in the house and then tried to justify herself by claiming self-defense. If it was really self-defense, why would she first deny seeing Travis? The prosecutor asked. These points undermined Jodi's credibility and gave the jury the impression that she was manipulating the truth in her favor. The trial went on for months, and each day escalated the public's attention. Reports from the courtroom conveyed the drama of the case and the contradictory image of Jodi Arias, who at the trial tried to appear remorseful, but often showed confidence and even indifference. Many noted her strange behavior. She was crying, then suddenly became emotionless, which caused contradictory feelings in the audience. After a long debate and consideration of all the evidence, the jury reached a verdict. Jodi Arias was found guilty of first-degree murder, premeditated and carefully planned. The verdict soon became widely debated. She faced either life in prison or the death penalty for her crime. That choice rested with the court, and the public watched the outcome with suspense. Ultimately, the court sentenced Jodi Arias to life in prison without parole. Sarah Louise Yarborough was born on June 12, 1975, in Portland, Multnomah County, Oregon. Ingrid Leiden, who taught Sarah during sixth-period chemistry at a Washington high school, reminisced about the delightful moments when Sarah would enter the classroom. The 16-year-old student at Federal Way High School often arrived late, rushing in just as the bell rang. As she quickly settled into her seat in the back row, she would greet everyone with a bright smile, prompting the chemistry teacher to say with a grin, "I never marked her tardy." Former neighbors described Sarah as a magical person with a magnetic personality, portraying her as someone who made a lasting impression on those around her. On the morning of December 14, 1991, Sarah set off from home to high school, eager to meet her drill team as they prepared to board buses for a competition. However, as her classmates began to board, it became clear that Sarah was missing. She never arrived. Around 9 a.m., two 12-year-old boys spotted a man emerging from the thick brush on the hillside behind the school. After he vanished from sight, the boys approached the area and were met with the tragic sight of a young girl lying lifeless in her drill team uniform. Sarah's body was found in an overgrown patch of brush, roughly 300 feet from her parked car. The 16-year-old had been strangled, and while the medical examiner found no definitive signs of sexual assault, the circumstances of her death were deeply alarming. After Sarah's lifeless body was discovered, authorities launched a large-scale operation to capture her killer, drawing significant attention from both the media and the community. The motive behind her seemingly random and senseless murder remained unclear. In the aftermath of the tragedy, fear swept through the community as the perpetrator was still at large, causing many to avoid going out at night. Parents urged children to walk in groups for safety, contributing to a widespread sense of unease. The King County Sheriff's Department received over 4,000 tips in response to the case. Despite the influx of information, investigators struggled to identify any viable suspects or persons of interest. A significant breakthrough occurred when a complete male DNA profile was recovered from Sarah's clothing, obtained from a semen sample left by the assailant. However, running this DNA through the National CODIS database did not produce a match. As weeks turned into months and months into years, the investigation generated only a few potential leads, all of which were thoroughly vetted and cleared. The narrative highlights how Sarah's classmates gradually moved on with their lives while she remained a frozen memory, her murder unresolved. The only physical description of the killer, provided by two witnesses who were minors at the time, described a man in his late teens to early 20s with shaggy, dirty blonde hair and blue eyes. Despite the efforts of a forensic sketch artist to create a composite sketch, it did not lead to any significant breakthroughs. By 2018, the composite sketch needed updating, as the suspect would now be nearly 3 decades older. Collaborating with Parabon Nano Labs, investigators employed a technique called polymorphism to create an age-progressed portrait of the suspect using DNA markers. Unfortunately, this approach did not lead to an arrest. In an effort to solve the decades-old cold case, police turned to ancestry websites, leveraging genetic genealogy to trace any DNA profiles linked to the killer. By October 2019, genealogists identified 2 biological brothers, ruling one out due to a prior rape conviction already in CODIS. Attention then shifted to the other brother, Patrick Leon Nicholas, who was 55 at the time and 27 during Sarah's murder in 1991. With a history of criminal convictions, including a 1983 attempted rape and a 1993 arrest for child molestation, he emerged as the prime suspect. The King County Sheriff's Department initiated surveillance, waiting for an opportunity to collect a DNA sample. The breakthrough came when Patrick dropped a cigarette and a napkin, providing investigators the chance to compare his DNA with the semen sample from 1991. The DNA comparison revealed an exact match, leading to Patrick's arrest on October 2, 2019, where he was charged with first-degree and second-degree murder with sexual motivation for Sarah's 1991 murder. Patrick Nicholas's trial began in May 2023 and lasted for 2.5 weeks. The jury found him guilty of first-degree felony murder, along with a special finding that Sarah Yarborough's killing was sexually motivated. As a result, Nicholas received a harsh sentence of 45 years and 8 months in prison, ensuring he would spend the rest of his life incarcerated. The judge emphasized the severity of his actions and his previous conviction for rape, noting the impact of his freedom on a community mourning the loss of a vibrant young girl with immense potential. Patrick was ordered to have no contact with the Yarborough family and was mandated to pay restitution, with the exact amount to be determined later. The Yarborough family expressed their gratitude to the dedicated police officers who tirelessly worked on the case, ultimately achieving justice for Sarah. On August 13, 1998, in Orange County, California, at 9:30 p.m., a distressed 911 call was made to the Placentia Police Department. Cheryl Deanda reported that her father, Jack Jesse, had been murdered. Upon arrival, officers discovered a chaotic scene in the living room: overturned furniture, Jack Jesse's lifeless body on the floor, and Cheryl, his daughter from a previous marriage, covered in blood. Cheryl explained that her father had called her to his home because his wife, Sandra, had gone out shopping and hadn't returned. Jack had asked Cheryl to check the local mall for Sandra. When Cheryl came back, she found her father dead on the floor. Sandra Jesse, who had been out getting dinner, arrived home around 10 p.m. to find the house surrounded by emergency personnel. There was no sign of forced entry. The intruder had apparently entered through an unlocked back door. The medical examiner found that Jack Jesse had been stabbed 4 times in the upper neck and chest. Detectives suspect that this was not a random crime, but a targeted attack on Jack, who was already seriously ill. In the early 1980s, Jack Jesse was a successful mechanical engineering manager for an international electronics company. He met Sandra at work, and both, being divorced with children, found an immediate and strong connection. Their relationship quickly became serious, and they married in 1984. Jack became a devoted stepfather and father, eventually growing into a loving grandfather. The blended family enjoyed activities like pool days, walks, and bowling. Jack, a laid-back family man, supported Sandra's decision to leave her job to manage their home. Despite the typical challenges of blended families, Sandra and Jack enjoyed a happy life together, and things seemed to be going well for their combined family. However, after several good years, their dynamic began to shift. Sandra was particularly close to her youngest son, Tom, and was dismayed when he announced he had accepted a job offer in Arizona. Although Jack congratulated Tom, Sandra struggled with her son's departure and found it difficult to focus on anything else. Jack expressed concerns to friends that Sandra's distress over Tom moving might be pushing her towards a breakdown. In response, Sandra proposed a solution. They should also relocate to Arizona. She was excited about the prospect of enjoying the pleasant weather and being closer to Tom. Jack, despite his deep love for Sandra, refuses to move to Arizona. His career, his grown daughters, and his grandchildren are all in California, making the decision clear to him. This refusal exacerbates the strain on their marriage, leading to further tension. Compounding their troubles, Jack receives a devastating diagnosis: colon cancer, a particularly harsh blow given that his mother recently died of the same illness. He faces a significant operation and a lengthy recovery with an uncertain prognosis. Despite these challenges, Jack finds solace in the support of his family. Tragically, in 1998, in Orange County, California, Jack Jesse is murdered in his own home. He is stabbed to death, and there are no signs of robbery or random violence. Detectives are convinced that someone deliberately ensured Jack's death before his time. There were no signs of forced entry into the home, no murder weapon was discovered, and no fingerprints were left behind, leaving detectives with scant evidence. With few leads, the police begin their investigation by interviewing close family members. Cheryl DeAnda, Jack's daughter from a previous marriage, had made the 911 call. When officers arrived, they found Cheryl kneeling beside her deceased father, covered in his blood. During questioning, Cheryl is profoundly distraught over the death of her father. Cheryl DeAnda explains that she attempted to perform CPR on her father, which is why her clothes were stained with his blood, but sadly, her efforts were in vain. Despite having her own family and young children, Cheryl had always been very close to her father and was deeply concerned about him after his cancer diagnosis. As detectives search for motives, Cheryl is considered a potential suspect, particularly if she might stand to gain from Jack's death. Sandra Jesse, Jack's wife, is also under scrutiny. Tensions had been high in their marriage since Sandra's son Tom moved to Arizona and Jack refused to relocate. With Jack's illness adding more stress, the strain on their relationship became more pronounced. After Jack's surgery, Sandra was distressed to learn about the extensive physical support he would need during his recovery, especially her aversion to the idea of a colostomy bag, which she found revolting. However, Sandra's discomfort with Jack's medical needs does not constitute a motive for murder. On the night Jack was killed, Sandra has a credible alibi. She had told Jack she was going to the mall to get dinner, but first stopped at the bank, which delayed her return. Her bank receipts, time-stamped with her visit, corroborate her account of being at the bank during the time of the murder. Another potential suspect is Sandra Jesse's son, Tom. Tom might have a motive since Jack's presence in Sandra's life is the only thing keeping her from moving to Arizona to be with him. If Jack were to die, Sandra could inherit his insurance policy, which would enable her to relocate and provide financial support if needed. However, Tom has a strong alibi. He was in Arizona at the time and appeared genuinely shocked and distressed by the news of his stepfather's death. Despite questioning everyone in the family, each suspect has a solid alibi, and the lack of physical evidence has left the police with few leads. As months pass, the case goes cold. Jack's family eventually moves on with their lives, but Jack's brother, David Jesse, remains determined to see the case resolved and keeps urging investigators not to give up. Then, years later, a breakthrough occurs. In 2005, during a routine review of the cold case, investigators discover a scrap of paper with a single name written on it. This crucial find reignites the investigation and opens up new possibilities in the long unsolved murder of Jack Jesse, which had been dormant for 7 years. 3 years after the murder, a tip from a local bartender surfaces, claiming he overheard a customer boasting about his role in arranging Jack Jesse's murder. Simultaneously, detectives revisit a piece of overlooked evidence, a scrap of paper found in Sandra Jesse's purse during the initial investigation, which bears the name Brett Schrauben. This new lead revives interest in the case. In 2005, as detectives re-examine the evidence, they discover that Brett Schrauben is not a name they had previously associated with the case. A background check reveals that Brett Shin is a former co-worker and friend of Sandra Jesse's son, Tom Ehlert, and that they even played on the same softball team. Despite Tom being in Arizona during the murder and Sandra having been out shopping, investigators now suspect both might have been involved in the conspiracy to kill Jack. To build a case for conspiracy, detectives need to establish that all the involved parties, Brett Schrauben, Tom Ehlert, and Sandra Jesse, collaborated in the plot to murder Jack. To achieve this, they initiate a strategy to gather more evidence and connect the dots among the suspects, starting with a letter-writing campaign to potentially draw out more information and evidence. Detectives send out copies of a newspaper article about Jack Jesse's murder to all 3 suspects, a tactic known as tickling the wire. Surveillance teams and wiretaps are already in place, and soon enough, the suspects make contact with each other. Sandra calls Tom, and Tom gets in touch with Brett. This communication leads police to bring Brett in for questioning. Once Brett Schrauben realized that detectives were onto the murder conspiracy, he quickly made a deal with prosecutors to avoid a murder charge. He provided crucial information about the roles played by Tom and Sandra Jesse in the murder. According to Brett, Sandra and Tom were motivated by the need to ensure Jack's death before his cancer treatments depleted his savings. Additionally, Sandra stood to benefit from Jack's life insurance policy, which would pay out in the event of his untimely death. Tom told Sandra that his friend Brett might have been the right man for the job. Brett agreed to meet with Sandra Jesse in a parking lot in June of 1998. She gave him $5,000 and promised him $45,000 more if he killed Jack. Brett said he knew Jack and that he was a nice man, but Brett wanted a new car, and this was how he intended to get it. Sandra gave Brett a drawing of the layout of their home, which showed the lounge chair where her sick husband spent most of his time. They agreed on a date and time for the killing, but things did not go exactly as planned. Sandra called Brett to tell him she was going shopping. Brett was supposed to kill Jack while she was gone and make it look like a burglary by stealing his coin collection. But then Brett got cold feet. He locked the door that Sandra had left open for him and later told Tom that she had forgotten to unlock it. Later that night, Sandra was disappointed that her husband was still alive when she returned from the mall. Tom called Brett and said Sandra was going to give him one more chance to complete the job. He won't receive the $45,000 unless he gets his act together and follows through with the plan. He attacked a dying man because he wasn't dying quickly enough. According to Schrauben's written confession, Tom Ehlert is arrested for the murder of his stepfather and is extradited to California for trial. Sandra Jesse is taken into custody in Arizona, where she relocated to be near her son. She faces one felony charge of murder with a special circumstance of murder for financial gain, as well as one felony count of conspiracy. Sandra Jesse proves difficult to apprehend and even harder to prosecute. When her trial ends in a mistrial, the DA must go all out to ensure justice is ultimately achieved. In 2009, Sandra Jesse is put on trial for the first-degree murder of her husband, Jack Jesse. The case is complex, with no physical evidence tying her to the crime scene, a solid alibi for the time of the murder, and the fact that 11 years have elapsed since Jack's death. The case also involves 3 interconnected suspects: Sandra Jesse, her son Tom Ehlert, and the alleged hitman Brett Schrauben. The prosecution started by highlighting the financial gains the conspirators would receive from Jack's death. Brett Schrauben uses his earnings from the hit to buy new furniture, a Ford pickup truck, and a jet ski. Sandra spends $500,000 over 3 years on a house near her son in Arizona. Tom uses his share to purchase a house, a truck, and a new boat, all funded by Jack Jesse's insurance payout and retirement savings. The trial concluded with the jury split 11-1 in favor of conviction, raising concerns that Sandra Jesse and her son might escape justice. However, Sandra Jesse's freedom is short-lived. She is arrested again and retried in 2011, this time with a new witness for the prosecution. During Sandra's second trial, her son Thomas Ehlert testified against her. Thomas Ehlert testified that his mother hired his former friend Brett to kill Jack. Like Brett, Tom had struck a deal with the prosecutors to receive a lighter sentence in exchange for his testimony. During Sandra Jesse's second trial, her attorney argued that she was a dedicated wife and that her son and his hitman friend are fabricating their involvement in the murder to hide their own guilt. The prosecutor countered by highlighting that Sandra Jesse manipulated her own son into helping her murder her ailing husband. Jack's brother, David Jesse, also took the stand. He recounted that his brother once said to him, "If anything happens to me, it's her." David added that Sandra took away his brother's best friend and companion. Cheryl Deanda, who found her father bloody on the floor of his living room, told the judge of her pain, her anger, and her despair. She said she's had many sleepless nights for 13 years and asked the judge to make her go away so they wouldn't have to see her again. This time around, the jury reached a unanimous verdict, and on December 7th, 2011, Sandra Jessie is found guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life imprisonment. Tom Ehlert was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. Leslie London Newlander, a 61-year-old resident of Fayetteville and longtime Syracuse, New York resident, appeared to lead a content life with her husband, Dr. Robert Newlander, a highly regarded gynecologist, and their children. She actively contributed to the community, participating in local charities and assisting those in need. However, on the morning of September 17, 2012, Leslie found herself in a dire situation. Her daughter, 23-year-old Jenna Newlander, urgently called 911, reporting that her mother had fallen in the shower and required immediate medical attention. Jenna recounted her father's plea for help, stating that he had discovered Leslie on the bathroom floor, bleeding. Paramedics promptly arrived at the couple's spacious residence, where they observed blood in various areas of the master bedroom, including pooled on the rug and spattered on the wall near the bed. Surprisingly, Leslie was found about 60 feet away from the reported fall site, as Robert had carried her there to administer CPR, disregarding Jenna's objections. Despite these efforts, it was too late, and Leslie was declared dead at the scene. Upon police arrival, Leslie was not discovered in the bathroom, but on the bedroom floor. Dr. Robert Newlander, her husband, explained to the police that he had moved her from the bathroom to the bedroom to administer CPR. Despite the paramedics' efforts, Leslie had suffered a severe and fatal head injury, leading to her being pronounced dead at the scene. During the police interview, Robert recounted discovering Leslie on the bathroom floor and subsequently moving her to the bedroom for CPR. Blood was found in various parts of the bedroom, including the rug and the wall next to the bed. The medical examiner determined that Leslie's cause of death was blunt force head injuries resulting from a fall from standing height. The belief was that she slipped in the shower and struck her head on the stone shower bench. The incident was deemed an accident, and the case was closed. The passing of Leslie came as not only a surprise to her family, but also as a profound shock to the broader community. The Newlanders, a well-regarded family in the region, were deeply liked. Robert, who served as a gynecologist and obstetrician in Syracuse, had built trust with numerous residents who had been patrons of his practice. Over a span of 28 years, he and Leslie shared their lives, raising 4 children. Emily and Brian, from Robert's previous marriage, were joined by Ari and Jenna, born to Robert and Leslie. The community in Syracuse was well aware of the Newlanders' extensive philanthropy, as they generously contributed both their time and resources to various charitable causes. Leslie's untimely death marked a tragic event for those who were acquainted with her. After Leslie's death, Robert sold the house and moved to a new one. Despite the fact that the case was closed and Robert moved, people in the community began to talk. There were rumors circulating that a lot of blood was found in the house and that Leslie's injuries were far more severe than would have been expected from a slip and fall in the shower. Was Leslie's death really the result of an accident? Other rumors were circulating as well. There were whispers suggesting that the Newlanders' marriage was not as stable as it seemed, with one person even claiming that Leslie had plans to lease a new apartment on the day of her death. The police also received an anonymous letter with the following content. There are doubts about him being the good guy everyone thinks he is. Leslie was trying to break away from this guy. Dr. Mary Jimbelik, the county's former chief medical examiner until her retirement in 2009, shared a close friendship with the Newlanders. However, some mutual acquaintances approached her, questioning whether she believed Leslie's death was truly accidental. Dr. Jumbalik became troubled when she examined the medical report, realizing the extent of Leslie's injuries. Leslie had sustained a deeply penetrating wound to the back of her head, so severe that blood had accumulated in her eye. This type of injury was typically associated with incidents like car accidents or heavy object beatings. Dr. Jumbalik informed the police that, in her professional opinion, Leslie's death was not accidental but rather a homicide resulting from blunt head trauma inflicted during an assault. Prompted by Dr. Jumbalik's assessment and the anonymous letter, the police reopened the case. Subsequent investigations confirmed the marriage troubles, with Leslie and Robert sleeping in separate bedrooms at the time of her death. Additionally, it was revealed that Robert's once thriving medical practice was facing financial challenges, no longer enjoying the same level of success. Despite Robert selling the house after Leslie's death, the police revisited the scene, this time considering it as the potential site of a homicide rather than a simple slip-and-fall accident. The second search uncovered overlooked details, such as blood at the back of the headboard on the bed and blood spatter on the blinds behind the bed. Subsequently, the police approached Robert with a request to answer some questions, to which he agreed. When questioned about the rumors circulating regarding marital issues, Robert acknowledged the problems, but insisted that there was no animosity and they still maintained a good relationship. He mentioned that the night before Leslie's death, they had even gone out for dinner with their children, Ari and Jenna. Providing a detailed account of the morning of Leslie's death, Robert described his routine, including a jog at Green Lakes and buying coffee for Leslie on his way back, a daily ritual. According to Robert, upon his return, Leslie was already in the shower. An hour later, around 8:25 a.m., he opened the bathroom door to check on her, discovering her on the floor. In response, he called out to Jenna and instructed her to call 911. Despite Jenna's plea during the emergency call not to move Leslie, citing the potential risk of a broken neck, Robert adjusted Leslie's position, finding it challenging to perform CPR in the bathroom. Following Robert's response to police inquiries, a re-evaluation of the evidence with a focus on the blood traces in the house and the gravity of Leslie's injuries led to Robert's arrest. He was subsequently charged with murder. Robert entered a plea of not guilty. The prosecution's narrative centered on the assertion that Robert had killed Leslie hours before making the 911 call and even before his morning jog. They argued that he assaulted Leslie in the bedroom using an unknown weapon, then moved her to the bathroom, where he struck her head against the shower bench to create the appearance of a slip and fall. The prosecution contended that Robert called Jenna at that point to make it seem like he had just discovered Leslie in the bathroom. Choosing to carry her back to the bedroom, despite Jenna's objections, was a deliberate move to explain the trail of blood from the bedroom to the bathroom. During the trial, the court heard from the Newlanders' housekeeper, who noticed unfamiliar sheets on the bed, leading the prosecution to suggest that Robert disposed of the bloodied sheets and potentially the murder weapon during his morning jog. The key evidence presented by the prosecution focused on blood spatter found in the house. The spatter was discovered on the headboard, nightstand, blinds behind the bed, and the south wall located approximately 7 feet south of the bed. The prosecution emphasized the spatter on the south wall, asserting it was impact spatter caused by Leslie's blood, indicative of a forceful blow if she were struck with an object. Expert testimony was called upon to explain this impact spatter to the jury. The court received testimony concerning the injuries sustained by Leslie. According to the medical examiner, Leslie's demise resulted from a complex and comminuted skull fracture, likely inflicted by multiple blows. Notably, bruises were found on her fingers, arms, and nose, accompanied by abrasions on both sides of her face. Initially considering it an accident from a slip in the shower, the medical examiner revised his opinion upon discovering additional evidence, now concluding it was a homicide. The court was informed that Leslie suffered at least 2 blows to her skull, with one wound inconsistent with her head striking a straight edge like a stone shower bench. The prosecution contended that the initial blow to Leslie's head was caused by an unidentified object. While Leslie exhibited injuries to her face and upper body, there were none below her waist. The court learned that if she had slipped and fallen, lower body bruising would likely have occurred. The prosecution urged the jury to find Robert guilty, emphasizing that Leslie's last moments were marked by a desperate struggle for her life before succumbing to a fatal beating and being callously discarded in her own shower. The defense presented its argument that Leslie's death was accidental, emphasizing her struggle with vertigo, a disorder causing dizziness. Testimony from her personal trainer revealed a recent worsening of Leslie's vertigo, a condition acknowledged to run in the family by her sister, Joanne London Leslie, who also attested to experiencing it. The defense addressed the prosecution's argument that the blood spatter showed that Leslie was attacked in the bedroom. It was their case that if there was a lot of blood spatter, the paramedics may have caused it by removing their gloves. The first responders probably had blood on their hands and that the gloves were just peeled off. And in so doing, the blood flies from the gloves and you don't have an impact, but you have a cast-off. Additionally, the defense raised the possibility that Robert himself, while attempting CPR, may have contributed to the blood spatter by removing his blood-stained shirt. However, they argued that the investigation's lack of professionalism made it challenging to interpret the spatter accurately. The court was informed that insufficient close-up images of the blood existed, and some blood, located behind the headboard and blinds, was collected months after Leslie's death, even after Robert had vacated the premises. Dr. Daniel Spitz, a medical examiner testifying for the defense, asserted his belief that Leslie's head wound resulted from a fall in the shower, where she struck her head on the stone bench. Despite Robert not testifying, his daughter Jenna took the stand. She described her 911 call and recounted the events of that fateful morning, revealing that she had been with her mother until 2 a.m. Jenna contradicted the housekeeper's claim about the sheets, insisting they remained unchanged from the police's arrival. Jenna attested to witnessing her father remove a blood-stained shirt during CPR in the bedroom, although the shirt itself was never located. She emphatically asserted her belief that her mother's death was accidental, given her presence in the house at the time. After a 3-day deliberation, the jury rendered a verdict, finding Robert guilty of second-degree murder and tampering with physical evidence. The defense asked the court to sentence him to the minimum term. At the sentencing hearing, Leslie's sister, Joanne London Leslie, spoke on the family's behalf. Had any of us even slightly suspected foul play of any sort, we would not be here today on Bob's behalf. Robert also spoke in court. My head is unbowed by the verdict of this court, for an innocent man has been wrongfully convicted. I would not and did not take a life. I love my wife Leslie very much, and I mourn her every day, now and forever. Robert was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison, and as he walked away, Jenna shouted after him, "Daddy, I love you. You're innocent." The case took an unexpected turn after the verdict, when an alternate juror reached out to Robert's lawyer, expressing concerns about potential juror bias. It was revealed that one of the jurors who had voted to convict Robert of murder, juror number 12, Johanna Lorraine, had exchanged approximately 7,000 text messages with family and friends during the trial. Several hundred of these messages involved inquiries about the case, a clear violation of the rules that prohibit jurors from discussing the trial. Robert's defense team, armed with this new information, initiated an appeal of his conviction. The court learned that Johanna Lorraine had both received and sent numerous texts about the case, including one from her father instructing her to make sure he's guilty. Another text asked if she had seen The Scary Man. Additionally, it was discovered that she accessed media websites covering the trial, raising concerns about external influences impacting her judgment as a juror. As a consequence of the text exchanges leading to concerns of juror bias, Robert's conviction was overturned and a new trial was ordered. After spending 3 years in prison, he was released on bail awaiting the commencement of the new trial. However, the scheduling of the new trial faced numerous delays, with adjournments attributed in part to the challenges posed by the coronavirus pandemic. The prosecution encountered an early setback for the new trial, losing one of their key witnesses as their medical examiner passed away. This loss is significant, particularly considering the importance placed on the testimony of Dr. Liesma during the first trial. The fact that the jury from the initial trial requested Dr. Liesma's testimony to be read back to them during deliberations suggests the weight they attributed to that testimony in determining Robert's guilt. In Dr. Robert's second murder trial in early 2022, notable differences emerged compared to the first trial. Two significant changes were apparent. Additional incriminating evidence was presented against him, and Jenna Newlander did not take the stand. During re-examination in 2021, forensic analysis revealed mummified fat tissue from Leslie's head on the headboard of the couple's bed, reinforcing the narrative of Dr. Roberts' alleged assault on her. Despite Jenna's 911 call being played in court, as it was during the first trial, the defense chose not to call her as a witness to testify in support of her father this time. Ultimately, the outcome of the legal proceedings mirrored that of the initial trial. Dr. Robert was convicted on March 17, 2022. Subsequently, he was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison on May 2nd, receiving credit for the time already served. Kristen Rossum, born on October 25, 1975 in Tennessee, USA, grew up in California and Virginia, as her family frequently moved due to her father's job. She had two siblings, and during her early teens, Kristen attended an all-girls boarding school where she started engaging in behaviors like drinking beer and smoking cigarettes. By the age of 17, in 1992, Kristen was already using methamphetamine. In 1994, she enrolled in a university, attempting to break free from prohibited substances use. However, after experiencing a relapse, she dropped out and relocated to San Diego. The course of her life changed in 1995 when she met Gregory DeVillers. It appeared that she had overcome her struggles with prohibited substances and was on the path to starting a family. Kristen and Gregory married in 1999 after she graduated with honors from San Diego State University in 1998. She pursued a career as a toxicologist, working in the city's medical examiner's office. Despite early challenges, it seemed that Kristen had successfully turned her life around and was enjoying a positive trajectory. However, not everything ends with a happy ending. On the 6th day of November in the year 2000, which happened to be a Monday, a 25-year-old woman named Kristen Rossum made a distress call to 911 at 9:22 p.m. from her residence in San Diego, California, situated in the United States. In her call, she reported that her 26-year-old husband, Gregory DeVillers, was not breathing and had allegedly taken his own life. The emergency dispatcher advised Kristen to perform CPR, but unfortunately, despite her efforts and the subsequent arrival of paramedics and police, Gregory was pronounced dead. Kristen and Gregory had been married for a relatively short period of 17 months. According to Kristen's account to the police on that evening, Gregory appeared somewhat drowsy, which she attributed to the effects of cold medication. Kristen further explained that she took a bath, and upon exiting, she discovered Gregory lying on the bed without signs of breathing. The police found the scene puzzling, as Gregory was located on the bedroom floor amidst scattered rose petals. A wedding photo was near his pillow, and crumpled diary pages belonging to Kristen were strewn on the floor. Kristen claimed that she moved Gregory to the floor in order to perform CPR. The police drew a comparison to a scene from the movie American Beauty due to the peculiar aspects of the situation. Initially, when the paramedics first arrived, Kristen informed them that her husband Gregory had not taken any drugs. However, later on, she changed her statement and mentioned that he might have ingested oxycodone. Upon their arrival at the hospital, Kristen conveyed to a nurse her suspicion that Gregory could have overdosed on oxycodone. The police, in their investigation, explored the possibility that Gregory's death might have resulted from an accidental overdose involving a combination of cold medicines and oxycodone. In their discussions with Kristen, they learned that Gregory was distressed, indicating that their marriage seemed to be on the rocks. This led Kristen to initially suggest to the police that he had taken his own life, an avenue of inquiry they also pursued. According to Kristen's account, the scattered rose petals surrounding Gregory's body were remnants from a bouquet he had gifted her for her birthday on October 25th. She believed that the use of these petals symbolized the end of their marriage, with one surviving rose being the source. Gregory's family, as well as others on the night his body was discovered, expressed skepticism about the notion of suicide. On November 8th, a significant turn in the investigation occurred when one of Kristen's co-workers, Russ Lowe, contacted the police. He revealed that Kristen was engaged in an extramarital affair with her manager, altering the trajectory of the police inquiry. Gregory first crossed paths in 1995, ultimately tying the knot in 1999. Kristen, initially struggling with methamphetamine abuse, turned her life around with Gregory's support and graduated with top honors in biochemistry. She secured a position as a toxicologist at the San Diego County Office of the Medical Examiner, OME, in March 2000. Meanwhile, Gregory pursued a career in the biotech industry. Shortly after Kristen commenced her employment at the OME, Michael Robertson, an Australian citizen, assumed the role of forensic laboratory manager, replacing Russ Lowe. Russ, who had been serving as the acting laboratory manager, had a lengthy tenure at the OME. The decision to appoint Michael instead of Russ to the permanent position generated tension within the laboratory environment. The atmosphere became even more strained when it became known among employees that Kristen and Michael, both of whom were married, were engaged in an extramarital affair. Concerns arose among some employees about the possibility of preferential treatment for Kristen. In October 2000, a few months after these revelations, Kristen resumed using methamphetamine. Police investigations revealed that on November 2, 2000, just 4 days prior to Gregory's discovery dead, he confronted Kristen about her prohibited substances use and his suspicion of her affair. Gregory insisted that she resign from the OME and threatened to expose her prohibited substances use and the affair to her employer if she refused. Following Gregory's death, an autopsy was conducted, including toxicology tests. Dr. Blackburn, the medical examiner, determined that Gregory died from acute fentanyl intoxication. Toxicology results indicated extremely elevated levels of fentanyl, along with smaller amounts of clonazepam and trace levels of oxycodone in Gregory's autopsy specimens. When questioned about the source of the fentanyl, Kristen claimed ignorance. However, the police were aware that, due to her role as a toxicologist, Kristen had access to fentanyl. The police theorized that Kristen may have secretly administered the fentanyl to Gregory, leading to his poisoning. They constructed a case based on the medical and toxicological evidence. Subsequently, Kristen was charged with first-degree murder, to which she pleaded not guilty. During the trial, Kristen's parents, Ralph Rossum and Claremont McKenna, went to great lengths to secure her $1.25 million bail by mortgaging their home. However, this financial commitment left them unable to afford a private attorney. Consequently, the court appointed a public defender to represent Kristen. The prosecution asserted that Kristen murdered Gregory because he threatened to expose her prohibited substances use and affair with Michael Robertson to her employer. According to the prosecution, Kristen allegedly poisoned Gregory with fentanyl, a potent synthetic opiate that is 80 times stronger than morphine. They suggested that she may have initially attempted to harm him with clonazepam, but when that failed, she resorted to using fentanyl. The prosecution further claimed that Kristen staged the bedroom to simulate a suicide, tearing pages from her diary and strategically placing petals and a wedding photo around Gregory's body. The court learned that Kristen, holding a degree in biochemistry, allegedly utilized her knowledge of prohibited substances and chemistry to carry out the poisoning. The prosecution argued that Kristen aimed to persuade her colleagues at the medical examiner's office where she worked that Gregory's death was a suicide. However, due to a conflict of interest, the case was transferred to another laboratory to conduct the toxicology tests, as it was normally the responsibility of the medical examiner's office to determine the cause of death in unusual cases. The prosecution described Kristen's activities on the 6th of November to the jury. In the morning, she informed Gregory's employer about his absence and then went to work. Her co-workers stated that an hour after arriving at work around 9 a.m., she was observed crying in Michael's office. The apartment complex manager, where Kristen and Gregory resided, testified that she returned to her apartment at 12:10 p.m., seen rushing inside. Later, at 12:41 p.m., she visited a local grocery store and bought a few items. In the hours leading up to Gregory's demise, she made multiple calls to Michael. Rose petals were discovered around Gregory's body, with Kristen attributing them to the lone surviving rose from the bouquet he gave her for her birthday. However, the police revealed a receipt indicating that Kristen purchased a single rose on the same day Gregory passed away. The court learned about the circumstances of Gregory's death and the elevated levels of fentanyl detected in the tested samples. Dr. Brian Blackburn, the medical examiner for San Diego County who conducted Gregory's autopsy, provided testimony stating that Gregory had already been deceased for at least an hour before the paramedics arrived. Dr. Blackburn informed the court that Gregory exhibited early bronchopneumonia, a condition arising when normal breathing processes fail to eliminate accumulated secretions in the lungs due to unconsciousness or shallow breathing. Furthermore, Dr. Blackburn disclosed that Gregory's bladder contained a significant amount of urine. This condition would have been uncomfortable for Gregory if he were conscious. As a result, Dr. Blackburn concluded that Gregory had experienced inadequate breathing for approximately 6 to 12 hours leading up to his demise. During Dr. Blackburn's testimony, he clarified that the amount of clonazepam discovered in Gregory's blood was not at the level of an overdose and deemed non-fatal by medical standards. The court was informed that the presence of fentanyl, especially in such elevated levels, was uncommon, and the Office of the Medical Examiner typically did not include it in routine tests. However, due to a conflict of interest, the samples were sent to Pacific Toxicology, and they conducted specific tests for fentanyl. In support of the prosecution, Dr. Theodore Stanley provided testimony. Dr. Stanley explained that fentanyl is a potent and rapid-acting pain reliever, emphasizing a serious side effect associated with it, the potential to induce respiratory failure, causing a person to stop breathing. Dr. Stanley testified that the speed with which fentanyl takes effect depends on the manner in which it is administered. The peak effect occurs about 16 hours after administration of a transdermal patch, 20 to 30 minutes after oral consumption, 15 to 20 minutes after intramuscular injection, and 5 minutes after intravenous injection. Dr. Stanley informed the court that fentanyl is typically not administered orally because the liver destroys approximately 65% of it, allowing only 35% to enter the bloodstream. However, when questioned about how fentanyl entered Gregory's body, neither Dr. Blackburn nor Dr. Stanley could offer a definitive opinion. Dr. Stanley suggested that the varying concentration levels in Gregory's system, combined with evidence of him being unconscious and breathing shallowly for an extended period before his death, indicated that fentanyl might have been administered to him multiple times. The prosecution, while unable to definitively explain how Kristen poisoned Gregory, presented indications that she may have applied fentanyl patches to his arm while he slept. The court was made aware that following Gregory's death and the discovery of fentanyl use, the Office of the Medical Examiner conducted an audit of its impounded drugs and drug standards. This audit revealed the disappearance of 15 fentanyl patches and 10 milligrams of fentanyl standard. Furthermore, the audit disclosed that Kristen had logged in the fentanyl standard and had been involved in each of the 3 cases where the missing fentanyl patches had been impounded. The Office of the Medical Examiner also discovered that quantities of methamphetamine, clonazepam, and OxyContin, a time-released form of oxycodone, were unaccounted for. It was the defense's case that Kristen was innocent. They conceded that fentanyl caused Gregory's death, but it was the defense's case that he committed suicide because he was despondent over his marital problems. During the trial, Kristen testified in her own defense. She informed the court that when she woke up on the morning of November 6th, Gregory appeared disoriented. At 7:42 a.m., she left a message with his employer, notifying them of his illness and absence from work. Kristen stated that she went to work but returned home to check on Gregory later. They had lunch together after midday. According to Kristen's testimony, she inquired about Gregory's earlier state, and he admitted to taking some of her oxycodone and clonazepam. After lunch, he went back to bed, and she returned to work. Leaving work at 2:30 p.m., she went back to the apartment, met with Michael, and then returned to the apartment around 5 p.m. She left again at 6:30 p.m. for errands. Kristen claimed to have returned at 8 p.m. and took a bath. Kristen testified that she entered the bath, believing Gregory was asleep, only realizing he wasn't breathing upon getting out. It was at that point she called 911. During cross-examination, the prosecutor criticized Kristen's account as bizarre. She admitted to previous lies, including ones about her prohibited substances use. The prosecutor emphasized that fentanyl, being challenging to detect, was an ideal poison, a fact Kristen, familiar with such substances due to her job, was well aware of. Despite Dr. Blackbourne's testimony stating that the clonazepam levels in Gregory's blood were not fatal, the defense argued that the combination of oxycodone and clonazepam could have a synergistic effect, making them more potent. However, this explanation did not address the mystery of how fentanyl was consumed and why such high levels were present. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury found Kristen guilty of first-degree murder and murder by special circumstances due to the use of poison. She was subsequently sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Kristen appealed her conviction, and during the appeals court proceedings, it was revealed that errors were made by her own defense team. Her lawyers admitted that while they acknowledged fentanyl as the cause of death, they neglected to request testing for fentanyl metabolites in the autopsy samples. This test could have helped establish whether Gregory had actually ingested fentanyl or if the presence of fentanyl in the samples was a result of laboratory contamination after his death. If the fentanyl was exclusively found in the samples and had never been in Gregory's body, it would have contradicted the prosecution's argument that fentanyl caused his death. The question arises: how could fentanyl be present only in the samples, and would there be any potential for laboratory contamination if the Office of the Medical Examiner sent the samples to a different laboratory for testing? The appeals court learned that there was a break in the chain of evidence concerning the samples. The appeals court learned that the samples, designated as specimens extracted from Gregory's body, were placed in an unsealed cardboard box. The intended procedure was for immediate transportation to the sheriff's office for subsequent transfer to an external laboratory. However, due to the unavailability of the designated recipient at the sheriff's office, the box containing the samples was retained within the Office of the Medical Examiner. Approximately 36 hours later, it was eventually transported to the sheriff's crime lab. The central argument presented to the appeals court was that during this time frame, when the samples were held in the OME, anyone with a key to the building had potential access to them. This opened up the possibility that fentanyl could have been introduced to the samples posthumously, casting doubt on the theory that fentanyl caused Gregory's death. Kristen contended that there might have been a motive to contaminate the samples and frame her for murder, pointing to the personal relationships and tensions among the OME employees. In support of this argument, Kristen highlighted an incident on November 8, 2000, where Michael, one of the individuals connected to the OME, reportedly mentioned to a toxicologist at the OME that he had examined a sample of Gregory's stomach contents. The three-judge panel of the Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals determined that Kristen's trial lawyers made a mistake by not challenging the prosecution's assertion that her husband died from a fentanyl overdose. They asserted that her legal team should have conducted tests on the autopsy samples for fentanyl metabolites instead of conceding to the prosecution's narrative. However, they did not overturn the conviction, but rather sent the case back to federal court for a hearing to assess whether this defense error could have changed the trial's outcome. Nevertheless, following a subsequent decision by the U.S. Supreme Court, which emphasized federal court deference to state court decisions in such matters, the appeals court panel opted not to order the hearing in Kristen's case. As a result, her appeal was denied, and she remains in prison. Michael Robertson, referred to as a co-conspirator during Kristen's trial, returned to Australia and established a forensics consultancy services firm. Wisconsin, a state with dense forests, vast green fields, and a silence broken only by the sound of wind and birdsong, has always seemed the epitome of coziness and simplicity. Its small towns, such as Athens, lived their own measured rhythm. People here knew each other by name, greeted each other on the street, shared news over morning coffee at the local diner. Problems usually boiled down to crop failure or the need to replace the roof of an old barn. However, even in such places of tranquility, sometimes dark secrets lurk that can shake an entire community. The Kuntz family farm was located about 5 miles from the center of Athens. It was surrounded by dense thickets and stretched across 108 acres of land where cattle were once raised and farmed. Over time, the farm fell into disrepair. The house that stood on the property looked like it hadn't known repair in decades. The sagging roof, peeling paint, and gnarled walls gave the impression of abandonment. But the place was inhabited. It was home to the Kuntz family, a strange and isolated group of people whose lives were lived away from prying eyes. The family consisted of 5 people. The head of the family was 76-year-old Clarence Kuntz, who had inherited the farm from his parents. Clarence was a man of firm character who did not tolerate interference in his life. Living with him were his younger brother Randy, age 30, 2 sisters Irene, 81, and Marie, 72, and their cousin Helen, who was 70. All family members seemed to find comfort in privacy in each other. Their ties, despite the age difference, were strong. They led an almost archaic lifestyle that was reminiscent of another era. The house they lived in was far from modern comforts. With no running water and minimal use of electricity, it looked more like a museum from the last century. The only source of heat was an old wood stove, and they brought water from the city or drew it from a well. The floors creaked, the walls were covered with a layer of dust, and there were old newspapers, boxes, and antiques lying around. It was as if the place reflected the character of its inhabitants, strange, confined, and full of secrets. The Kuntz rarely interacted with their neighbors. They occasionally appeared in the city to buy food or other necessities, but even then they tried to remain inconspicuous. People in Athens remembered them as quiet and strange, but generally harmless people. They always paid cash and avoided long conversations. Their rare appearances only fueled rumors. Some said the family had secret wealth hidden on the farm, others speculated that they were simply distrustful of everyone around them. However, no one could say they knew anything for sure about the Kuntz lives. Their reticence not only isolated them from society but also made them an object of curiosity. Neighbors said that they sometimes noticed old things or garbage being taken out of the house, but they never saw any visitors coming there. Even relatives who lived in other cities rarely kept in touch with them. It was a family that lived by its own rules and avoided the outside world. But amidst this isolation, they still had one constant contact with the outside world: Helen's son Kenny Kuntz. Despite his disagreements with his family, he visited the farm often, keeping in touch with his mother and the rest of his relatives. His visits were rare, but brought joy to the family, as guests were almost never present in their home. Kenny was one of the few threads connecting the Kuntz family to the outside world. In early July 1987, the heat in Wisconsin was unbearable. The air was thick and the roads were dusty under the bright sun. In the morning, Keeney headed to the farm to visit his mother and the rest of the family. He drove down the winding road surrounded by dense forest, thinking about helping around the farm or bringing something from town. When he pulled up to the farm, something immediately alerted him. Usually at this time he heard sounds, the noise of a wood saw working, a dog barking, or voices coming from the house. But on this day, it was all too quiet. The parking lot outside the house was empty and the doors were closed, as if no one was inside. Kenny went to the door and knocked, but there was no answer. At first he thought the family might have left, but that was odd. They rarely left the farm. He decided to open the door and look inside. As soon as he entered, a strange feeling swept over him. The house looked the same as it always did, clutter, the smell of old things and dust. But something was different. This silence was too pressurizing. As he passed into the hallway, he noticed a motionless body on the floor. Keeney froze. At that moment, a cold dread seized him. Gathering his strength, he continued to look around the house. His fear only increased with each step. In various rooms, he found the bodies of his relatives. Clarence, Randy, Irene, and Marie were all dead. All of them had been murdered. But what shocked him the most was the absence of his mother, Helen. She was neither among the living nor the dead. It became a mystery that seemed to overshadow even the tragedy itself. Unable to remain in the house, Keeney ran outside and called the police. He knew that his life and the history of the Kuntz family would never be the same again. When the police arrived at the Kuntz family farm, the crime scene immediately raised many questions for them. The old house, surrounded by dense thickets and fields, stood in an oppressive silence. The lot looked abandoned, but inside the house was something that broke the routine of this secluded corner of Wisconsin. What they discovered was the beginning of one of the most mysterious investigations in the state's history. The house was locked from the inside. Upon entering, police officers immediately smelled a strange odor that grew stronger as they progressed. The first thing that caught the eye was the absolute chaos. Everything looked as if the occupants lived among mountains of garbage. In the hallway lay the body of 72-year-old Marie Kuntz. She had been shot in the head, her body frozen in a strange pose, as if she had tried to get out of the house but had failed. In the kitchen was the body of Randy Kuntz. A man had been killed under similar circumstances. His body was lying next to the dining table, which still had empty plates on it. Police officers assumed that Randy had been shot while he was sitting at the table. In the bedroom, they found Clarence Kuntz. His body was on the bed. The situation indicated that he was either resting or about to go to bed when he was attacked by the killer. Irene Kuntz, the older sister, was sitting in a chair in the living room. It was as if she had frozen in the last moment of her life. It was eerie because it seemed that she didn't even realize what had happened. All the victims had one thing in common. They were all shot in the head with a .22 caliber weapon. At first glance, it seemed that the perpetrator acted quickly and in cold blood, leaving the victims no time to react. But what puzzled the police the most was the absence of one family member, 70-year-old Helen Kuntz. She was neither among the living nor the dead. This led investigators to wonder, could Helen have been involved in the murder? The woman's age and physical condition didn't immediately suggest her involvement. But the lack of obvious signs of forced entry and resistance, and the fact that all the family members had been killed and she had disappeared, led police to consider this theory. Perhaps she was the survivor and was now trying to hide to avoid responsibility. The police officers began to examine the house in more detail. Their attention was drawn to oddities that could shed light on the circumstances of the murder. Large amounts of cash, about $20,000, were found in the house, hidden in jars, boxes, and between the pages of old books. The money was untouched, which immediately ruled out the robbery version. This reinforced suspicions that the motive for the murder may have been personal. Another important find was Helen's footprints. In one of the rooms were found her personal belongings, a bag, clothes, and shoes. This indicated that she had not left the house in a hurry. On the contrary, it appeared that she may have been there at the time of the murder and somehow survived. In addition, investigators had no evidence that she had been abducted. There were no signs of a struggle in the house, The door was locked from the inside, and there was no damage that would indicate forced entry. All of this indicated that Helen either knew the killer or had been involved in the crime herself. Uncovering details of the family's life, the police began to put the puzzle together. They learned that Helen had frequent conflicts with family members, especially Clarence, whom she accused of taking away her freedom. Neighbors recalled that Helen was the only one of the family who sometimes expressed dissatisfaction with their lifestyle. She said she wanted to leave but could not because she was financially dependent on relatives. Based on this evidence, investigators hypothesized that Helen may have killed her family in a fit of desperation to free herself. She may have killed them and then fled to start a new life. The lack of signs of a struggle and the fact that everyone was killed in homes where they felt safe only heightened suspicion. While the operatives were looking for possible evidence to support this version, they began to examine other details. Particular attention was paid to the weapon from which the shots were fired. Neither a gun nor cartridges were found in the house. However, local testimony revealed that Helen had purchased .22 Teal caliber ammunition shortly before the tragedy, saying that her son, Kenny, needed it to hunt blackbirds. That information added even more suspicion. Investigators speculated that Helen may have used the weapon to kill and then disposed of it. If so, where is she now and what could have made her take such a drastic step? The police began scouring the surrounding area of the farm, hoping to find traces of Helen. The dense woods, marshes, and overgrown fields were ideal places to hide. Using dog handlers and volunteers, they searched for her within a few miles of the farm. However, no trace of her was found. It was as if Helen had vanished. This mystery continued to trouble investigators. If Helen was the killer, how was she able to escape without help? If she was kidnapped, why was there no sign of a struggle? And if she was the victim, where is her body? For days after the murder, the police continued to regard Helen as the prime suspect. However, the absence of any trace of her presence outside the house gradually began to undermine this theory. All the evidence suggested that the killer had acted quickly, cold-bloodedly, and systematically. Helen, in the opinion of those who knew her, was a weak woman, both physically and psychologically. She could hardly have planned such a precise crime. But the key moment occurred when one of the officers drew attention to Kenny Kunt's testimony. He mentioned that his mother had recently complained about the strange behavior of a family acquaintance associated with car sales. This was the first clue that could take the investigation in a new direction. As police began scrutinizing the crime scene and interviewing witnesses, they focused on a key mystery: where was Helen Kuntz? At first, the woman's absence from among the dead led to speculation that she might have been connected to the murders. As the investigation continued, however, that theory became less and less convincing. And then came an unexpected turn. Just weeks after the discovery of the bodies at the farm, Helen Kuntz's body was found. This discovery was a milestone in a confusing case. After nearly a month of searching, on August 4th, 1987, a hunter came across the body of an elderly woman lying in a thicket near the farm. Forensics later confirmed that it was Helen Kuntz. The body was in a state of severe decomposition, making it difficult to determine the exact cause of death. However, forensic experts were able to determine that she had been shot with the same gun as the rest of the family. Now the police had a new theory. Helen was not an accomplice, but the fifth victim of the killer. The place where her body was found added to the mystery. It was only a few miles from the farm, but in such dense woods that it was almost impossible to find it without a focused search. This indicated that the killer knew the area well, but why would he kidnap Helen only to kill her away from the others? The discovery of Helen's body allowed investigators to rethink the killer's motives. They began to consider more complex theories involving personal grudges, calculations, or an attempt to cover their tracks. Helen's disappearance on the night of the murder was likely not random. Police speculated that the killer had purposely taken her out to get something more: information, money, or access to something that was important to him. By this time, Christopher Jacobs I had come to the attention of police. He was acquainted with the family through car deals and, as it later turned out, knew about their secluded life and the large amount of cash the family kept in the house. What's more, investigators discovered that Jacobs had been in contact with Randy Kuntz shortly before the murders. A key piece of evidence linking Jacobs to the crime scene was tire tracks found on the farm property. Traceology experts confirmed that the tire tracks matched the model of truck Jacobs was using. This fact allowed the police to focus on him as the prime suspect. In addition, the investigation revealed that Jacobs had access to the .22 caliber handgun that was used in the murders. One witness reported seeing a weapon in his possession that looked like it could have been the weapon of the crime. However, the gun was never found, making it difficult to directly link Jacobs to the murder. Police also took notice of Jacobs' financial situation. He was young, but already had significant debts. His used car business was unstable and his standard of living exceeded his income. This made him a possible criminal who could have gone on a killing spree for money. However, the money found in the house remained untouched, making it difficult to build a case for a self-serving motive. One of the hypotheses of the investigation suggested that Jacobs might have known about the hidden money but failed to find it. He may have kidnapped Helen to get her to tell him where it was hidden. This theory explained why she was taken away from the crime scene, but left open the question, why was she eventually killed? Jacobs was called in for questioning, where police hoped to get key clues. He behaved nervously but continued to deny involvement. His alibi was weak. He claimed to have been at home on the night of the murders, but was unable to provide evidence or witnesses. Moreover, he was confused about the details, which further increased suspicion. Investigators tried to press him with testimony from neighbors who had seen his truck near the farm on the night of the murders. Jacobs, however, insisted on his innocence, claiming he had never been at the farm that day. His defense was looking less and less convincing, but the police still had no direct evidence. Despite the circumstantial evidence and Jacobs' suspicious behavior, the case proved complicated. The lack of a gun that could have served as direct evidence and ambiguous witness statements made it impossible to press charges immediately. The police were forced to release Jacobs while continuing to gather additional evidence. This decision caused resentment in the community. Athens residents felt that the police were missing an obvious suspect. The story of the Kuntz family, with their bizarre lifestyle and violent deaths, became more and more discussed. Many believed that the case might have involved more than just personal motives or self-interest. In 1989, almost 2 years after the murders, Jacobs was still arrested. The prosecutor's office decided that the evidence gathered was enough to charge him with murder. The investigation built a case based on tire tracks, witness statements, and speculation about his motives. However, Jacobs' attorneys argued that the charge was based on circumstantial evidence and speculation. At trial, the prosecution faced difficulties. The evidence, while pointing to Jacobs' connection to the farm, did not support his direct involvement in the murder. The gun was never found, and the motive for the crime remained unclear. As a result, the jury found Jacobs not guilty of murder. This verdict was a disappointment for the investigation and caused a storm of emotions among the public. Despite the acquittal, police continued to monitor Jacobs. He remained the prime suspect, and investigators believed they would eventually be able to gather more evidence. Public pressure only strengthened their resolve to solve the case. During the investigation and trial of the Kuntz family case, new testimony came to the attention of the police. One witness, previously unconnected to the case, gave an unexpected statement that added a new layer to an already confusing picture. The witness claimed to have been present at the farm on the day of the tragedy and witnessed a conflict that he said may have led to the murder. The witness, a man whose name was withheld to protect his safety, stated that he came to the Kuntz family farm to view a used car that Randy Kuntz was selling. He said he knew Randy through a common circle of acquaintances and had heard that he often bought and sold cars. He said the transaction was scheduled for late in the evening, which was not unusual for Randy, who preferred to hold such meetings after his day's business on the farm. When the witness arrived, he saw that another man was already at the farm. He later identified him as Christopher Jacobs. According to the witness, a verbal altercation ensued between Randy and Jacobs. He claimed it was about money, with Jacobs allegedly accusing Randy of selling him a defective car or failing to repay a debt related to a past transaction. The witness testified that the argument between Randy and Jacobs quickly escalated into a physical confrontation. He claimed that Randy began yelling at Jacobs, after which the latter pulled out a gun. The witness, fearing for his life, ran out of the house and hid behind a car. From his words, he heard shouting and the sound of gunshots, after which the farm became quiet. "I was afraid I would be killed too," he recounted in his testimony, "so I did not return to the house and left immediately. I was in shock and didn't know what to do." The witness claimed that he was unaware of the extent of the tragedy until he heard about it on the news. His fear of possible retaliation against Jacobs kept him silent for several years. The statement raised many questions for investigators, but also helped to recreate a possible scenario of events. If the witness's version is correct, the conflict could indeed have started with an ordinary transaction, but quickly escalated into a tragedy. Police officers began to verify his statement, comparing it to other evidence already collected at the crime scene. Investigators found a connection between the witness statement and Jacobs' behavior. He was already known for his temper and aggressive reactions to conflicts. Moreover, his financial difficulties may have provoked him to threaten or use force. After the witness gave his testimony, police again contacted Jacobs' ex-girlfriend, Stacy Weiss. She confirmed that Christopher had repeatedly talked about his disagreements with Randy. Moreover, Stacy stated that Jacobs once told her about a fight at the farm that got out of hand. According to her, Jacobs described the events as if he had not planned the murder, but as a result of his temper got involved in the tragedy. He allegedly told her, "I just wanted them to realize they shouldn't mess with me." Stacy also reported that after the conflict, Jacobs was highly agitated and tried to hide the gun. After comparing the witness statement and Stacy's confession, investigators began to reconstruct a possible scenario. According to this version, Jacobs had come to the farm to settle his financial claims against Randy. However, the dispute quickly spiraled out of control. After he shot Randy, the rest of the family may have become unwitting witnesses, leading him to eliminate them to avoid exposure. Helen may have tried to run away or fought back, causing him to decide to take her out to deal with the situation away from the farm. This new testimony was an important link in the chain of evidence. They allowed police and prosecutors to present Jacobs' motive and explain his actions. In 1998, when Jacobs was rearrested in the Helen Kuntz kidnapping case, prosecutors aggressively used this testimony to strengthen their case. At trial, the witness corroborated his words, and prosecutors linked them to Stacy's confession. This combination of evidence created a more convincing picture of what had happened and finally convinced the court that Jacobs was guilty of kidnapping. After Christopher Jacobs' arrest in 1998, the case regained publicity. The prosecutor's office could no longer charge him with murder because of the double jeopardy principle, which prohibits double jeopardy prosecutions for the same crimes. However, the confession of his ex-girlfriend Stacy Weiss and the testimony of a witness about the conflict on the farm allowed to bring a new charge against Jacobs, the kidnapping of Helen Kuntz. This new trial was another turning point in a convoluted case that had remained in the public eye for years. The trial began with tense opening statements from the parties. Prosecutors sought to show that kidnapping Helen was a key element of Jacobs' actions on the night of the murder. They argued that he drove her from the farm to force her to reveal the secret location of the family money, and then killed her to cover his tracks. The defense, for its part, argued that the kidnapping charges were built on assumptions and unreliable testimony. Jacobs' attorneys argued that their client had been unfairly condemned by public opinion after the first trial, and that the prosecution was trying to use this situation to punish him for crimes of which he had been acquitted. Jacobs' lawyers focused on undermining the credibility of key prosecution witnesses. They argued that Stacy Weiss may have fabricated Jacobs' confession in exchange for mitigating her own legal troubles. The defense also pointed out that the witness who claimed to have seen the conflict had not reported it to police for years, casting doubt on his veracity. In addition, the defense focused on the lack of direct evidence of the abduction. They argued that Helen's body could have been taken to the place where she was found after her death, and that the lack of signs of struggle or resistance did not confirm that she had been abducted. After weeks of deliberations, the jury retired to deliberate. Their deliberations lasted only 10 hours. Ultimately, Christopher Jacobs I was found guilty of kidnapping Helen Kuntz. The court found that the prosecution's evidence, including the testimony of Stacy Weiss and a witness, was sufficient to establish his guilt. Jacobs was sentenced to 31 years in prison. Hello friends, my name is Benjamin. Today's story took place in the small town of Sarasota, Florida, a resort town on the warm Gulf of Mexico, a cozy town where people felt safe until one event. It all starts with 11-year-old Carly in the life, which like any child has various events. The girl's parents divorced long ago, but she continued to love both of them. Every weekend she spent with her father, flew to him in New York. But Carly lived with her mother and stepfather. She was one of the most wonderful kids, kind and positive, and she always tried to give her eternal optimism to the people around her. She was that way because of her father. Carly had blonde hair, blue eyes, and an upturned nose. Friends, relatives, and just others saw what a beautiful girl and what her character is. And everyone said that in the future, she will become a famous model or actress. But relatives and Carly herself could not know that unfortunately it will not happen. January 31st, 2004 was an ordinary day. Carly and her weekend decided to go to a friend's house for the night. The girls did all the things that all girlfriends do when staying overnight at each other's house. They painted each other's nails, listened to music, and gossiped about their classmates. The visiting time flew by so quickly that the girls didn't notice how evening came. As is customary in all families Sunday night, the whole family was to gather and watch the Super Bowl game. Carly really wanted to get home by then, and so she told her friend's mom that her parents were waiting for her at home and she could go home alone. The friend's mom was worried, but Carly insisted and went home at 6 p.m. 13 minutes. That's how long it took to get to the street where the Bruscia family lived. It was only 750 meters. After Carly left, the friend's mom contacted the parents because she was worried and said that Carly had left alone. Susan, Carly's mom, was very worried about her daughter who had gone completely alone, even though the distance was only 2 blocks. So a worried Susan asked Stephen, her husband, Carly's stepfather, to come out to meet her. Stephen immediately goes out to meet Carly. They were to meet halfway and go into the store. Stephen always spoiled his stepdaughter, and the night before had promised before the match to buy her a bunch of sweets. Stephen walked the whole route several times, but couldn't find Carly. She disappeared. From that moment, all the horror in the life of Carly and her parents begins. The feeling of concern and excitement was not in vain, because in the future, they were waiting for events that will lead to the shock of the whole city. Stephen searched for Carly for over an hour. He passed the route a few more times in the hope that he and Carly simply went off on different roads. It became obvious that something had happened to her. After all, the distance between the houses wasn't that great, and the route was known to everyone. Susan and Stephen set out again to find Carly. They walked the streets, drove through neighborhoods shouting loudly, looking for the girl by name. They looked through all the suspicious places, such as a wooded landing, and at that moment they noticed something rather strange. A red tow truck was driving past them very slowly, and they decided to follow it. Susan and Stephen continued to follow the tow truck and saw that it was going to Carly's friend's house, which of course surprised them. The same red tow truck that they had seen a little earlier was parked outside her friend's house that Carly had come out of a couple hours ago and disappeared from. It was parked outside Carly's friend's house. This struck the parents as odd. After realizing that Carly is nowhere to be found, Susan decides it's time to call for help and calls 911. Usually, when an adult goes missing, police officers wait 24 hours before beginning a search. Searching for children always requires immediate action. So the officers immediately split into teams and began interviewing the family of Carly's friend, as well as Carly's parents, Stephen and Susan. Detectives scrutinized the route and the immediate area, but she could not be found. Stephen and Susan are desperate and don't know what to do. Friends of Carly's family joined the search. On all the walls and poles of the city can be seen flyers with a photo and the inscription "Missing Carly." The next morning, something suspicious happened that made some people doubt Stephen, Carly's stepfather. When he was handing out flyers at a local company, he asked one of the employees if he could buy illegal substances for him. The employees thought this was very suspicious because his stepdaughter had been missing for only a couple days. The employees contacted the authorities and told them about it. The detectives also kept an eye on Stephen, thinking he was suspicious. The police decided to call Stephen in for questioning. During the interrogation, Stephen stated that he was with Susan at home the entire time, and she also confirmed this. Moreover, when he was walking down the street to meet her from a friend, he was on the phone with Susan the entire time, which the phone records confirmed. Stephen reported that he did not find Carly and walked Carly's route for over an hour looking for her. After Stephen's alibi was fully checked, he remained a suspect. But Stephen remembered about a suspicious red tow truck that he and Susan had seen the day it went missing. Its owner was Ron Shokit. Ron had been dating his friend Carly's mom for months. Stephen told police that he saw the truck driving slowly near a wooded area just after Carly's disappearance and then parked near Carly's friend's house. Investigators began to test that theory as well. They called Ron in for questioning. Ron reported that he had left for work before Carly left and had not noticed anything unusual. The police also tracked Ron's movements that day, checked his alibi, and ruled him out as a suspect because he was at work at the time of Carly's disappearance, as confirmed by his employer and surveillance cameras. The day after Carly's disappearance, the police again decided to talk to Susan. She claimed in front of the police officers that her daughter had never run away before, and she had no reason to think that Carly might have run away. However, the information that came from Carly's friends diverged significantly from the version that Susan had told. Carly's friend reported to the police that she had been extremely depressed and upset the previous day. In her conversations, she expressed reluctance to return home, claiming that there were too many responsibilities waiting for her there. This new information led law enforcement officials to consider the possibility that Carly had decided to leave voluntarily. However, given her young age, investigators cannot completely dismiss the abduction theory. In an effort to provide complete clarity, investigators have asked Susan to contact Carly's dentist to obtain dental records, which may be helpful if an identification is needed. The next morning, police officers enlisted police dogs in the search for Carly. Susan and Stephen let the dogs' canine handlers into their daughter's bedroom. The dogs sniffed the bedroom linens and the girls' clothes and picked up the trail. They followed Carly's intended route from her friend's house to her home. Carly's tracks led police to a car wash, by which Carly apparently wanted to take a shortcut. Near the back entrance of the car wash, the dogs lost Carly's trail. Fortunately, the area was equipped with 2 cameras, one capturing the cars that were closer to the entrance, the other capturing the far area. Unfortunately for the cops, there were also blind spots that remained out of sight. Police realized that if Carly was taken away by a criminal, it was unlikely he did it under camera surveillance. But they sat down to study the footage. The camera at the entrance didn't capture anything. Officers reviewed all the footage from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. that evening, but there was no footage. However, a second camera, which was in the far corner, managed to capture some interesting moments. At 6:21 p.m., it captured Carly. She was walking with a calm stride towards the house. Carly was wearing the same red t-shirt and blue jeans, and her hair was styled in a small bundle. Suddenly, a man appeared in the frame, white-skinned, stocky, of medium height, and with dark hair and a special mark, a tattoo on his forearm. The stranger was wearing dark blue work overalls with a name tag on them, as if he worked at a gas station or car service. The alleged perpetrator approached Carly, said something, then grabbed her wrists and dragged her toward the camera's blind spot. This was probably the last person to see Carly alive. Criminal or not, he should have been found as quickly as possible and found out what happened in that very parking lot on February 1st at 6:21 p.m. The horrible quality of the security camera footage made it impossible to see a face, much less a name tag on the man. There was only one hope: to involve the public in the search. The CCTV footage had been all over the news for 24 hours, and the footage had been published in the newspapers. They had to spread the word as much as possible. Perhaps someone could recognize a person by their shape, build, or gait. The police opened a special call center, hoping to get information about what had happened to Carly, or at least some information from possible eyewitnesses. Within 24 hours, they received more than 700 calls. Operators recorded every statement, but they were all unsuccessful. Until, toward evening, they got the lead that led them to find the perpetrator. On Tuesday, February 3rd, police received a call from a man who said he knew the man in the videotape. The caller identified himself as his business associates. He said the man's name is Joseph Smith, and he is easily recognizable by his peculiar uniform and awkward gait. Police officers instantly grabbed a long-awaited lead. While operators continued to answer the phone, detectives ran Joseph Smith's information. The man came to Sarasota County from Brooklyn, New York in 2003. He was an auto mechanic by trade, was married but divorced twice. His 3 adult daughters were college graduates. The new suspect was 37 years old. He had a long criminal record, and his criminal history dates back to 1993. It was a variety of charges, including solicitation of minors. Joseph Smith, who suffered from back problems for most of his life, was seriously addicted to illegal substances. He had been arrested numerous times, including 3 times for assaulting women. At the time of Carly's disappearance, he was on probation. One of Smith's co-workers reported that he had been acting strangely since Carly's disappearance, and the day before had not shown up for his shift at all. He also reported that Smith had been using illegal substances. This co-worker confirmed that the man in the videotape strongly resembled Smith in appearance, demeanor, and clothing. Another co-worker also confirmed that the man in the videotape closely resembled Joseph Smith and reported that the day after Carly was kidnapped, Smith showed up to work under the influence of illegal substances. Smith's co-workers said Joseph was having trouble at work because of illegal substances and debt. Police decide to once again review all of the car wash videos from just before Carly's abduction to try to link the kidnapper to one of the cars passing or stopping near the car wash. Joseph's co-workers reported that he drove a brown Lincoln. However, at the time of the abduction, it was under repair. Of all the cars passing in the field of view of the video cameras, police considered suspicious a light-colored Buick station wagon that pulled into the car wash parking lot about 3 minutes before Carly was abducted. The car stopped briefly in the parking lot and drove away. The quality of the video footage did not allow police to determine the license plate number or identify the driver. Police made the decision to go to Joseph Smith's home. Officers arrived at the home of Joseph's friends, from whom he was renting a room, as his wife had kicked him out of the house. Joseph opened the door with a surprised face and seemed shocked that he had been mistaken for the kidnapper. The police officers continued questioning Joseph, paying attention to the details of his alibi. Joseph insisted that he was at home enjoying watching the Super Bowl at the time of Carly's disappearance, and that his friends could confirm his presence at the time. However, when presented with a video camera image of a man who strongly resembled him, Joseph suddenly admitted that the man looked like him. However, he insisted that he was at home that evening and could not have been in the area of the car wash. Detectives decided to conduct additional checks by asking Joseph to show his hands and roll up his sleeves. During this check, it was discovered that Joseph had tattoos on his forearm similar to those seen in the surveillance footage. Furthermore, investigators observed several fresh scratches on his face and hands. During further interviews with investigators, Joseph admitted that he had indeed borrowed the light-colored station wagon from his friends that day. However, he claimed that he only drove it to a nearby marina to enjoy the view of the water before returning home. The investigation continued. Police were certain of Joseph's involvement in Carly's disappearance. However, the owner of the apartment from whom he rented, Mimi, confirmed his alibi, which confused investigators a bit. Police conducted a full and thorough search of Joseph's Lincoln, where they found several syringes, illegal substances, and spoons, and arrested Joseph for violating the terms of his probation. A few hours after Joseph's arrest, police were contacted by Joseph's friend and Mimi's husband, Jeff Pincus, and told that Mimi had mixed up the dates when she gave her statement. They stated that they had indeed lent him their car, but that he had not returned in the evening as promised, and had not arrived until just before morning. They also testified that before Joseph left, they zeroed the odometer, and after Joseph returned, they checked it and found that it had traveled more than 300 miles, and the car inside looked shabby. The back seat was down. The officers then asked Joseph's friends if they could remember what Joseph was wearing when he left the house. Jeff replied that he was wearing a mechanic's uniform. It was obvious to the police officers, but it was necessary to find indisputable evidence of Joseph's involvement in the case. The police got permission from Joseph's friends to search their house, where Joseph rented a room, but they found nothing that could prove Joseph's involvement in Carly's disappearance. Also, police still couldn't figure out where Carly was. Police searched wooded areas near where Carly was last seen in the videotape. However, the search yielded no results. While the police were diligently searching for Carly, one of Joseph's longtime acquaintances came to the police building at this time. He confirmed that the man in the videotape looked a lot like Joseph and also gave some very important information. The man said that Joseph had recently been talking about his growing desire to assault women. After this conversation, police officers transported Joseph from the jail to the station for questioning. Joseph walked into the interrogation room. He wanted to talk to his mom or his brother. The detective convinced Joseph to contact the public defender's office and have an attorney visit him. During this interrogation, the officers were never able to get anything out of Joseph, so he was transferred back to jail. There, he was finally able to talk to his brother, John. What he told his brother confirmed everyone's worst fears. 5 days after Carly's disappearance, Joseph's brother John decided to contact the police and told them a terrible secret. He showed the police where Carly's body was. He directed them to the church on Proctor Road, in the woods. John revealed that his brother had confessed to the kidnapping and brutal attack on Carly. John said that it was Joseph who had killed Carly, beaten and finally strangled her with a shoelace. He confessed that he wanted to use sharp instruments, but was afraid he wouldn't be able to wash the car afterward. The confession was so cruel and disgusting that the brother simply could not express his emotions and was terribly shocked by such a terrible secret. Hearing his brother's secret, John thought that he had used forbidden substances or committed theft, but he could not think that he would reach such a point. Then, Joseph's mother also informed the police that her son had contacted her and confessed to what he had done. The police found Carly's remains exactly where John had pointed. Carly was clearly struggling and trying to fight for life. The cause of death was determined by the investigation to be strangulation. Detectives also confirmed that Carly's body had been assaulted by Joseph. Forensic examination confirmed traces of Joseph's DNA on Carly's body, as well as fibers of Joseph's clothing and hair. That is, the perpetrator's guilt was fully proven. In the car that Joseph borrowed from friends that day, 2 hairs belonging to Carly and several fibers of clothing matching the one Carly was wearing that day were found. Joseph was charged with murder. The defense attorney tried to argue that the police officers had framed his client, but Joseph's body fluids and hair were found on Carly's body. According to the prosecutor's version, Joseph Smith had taken a shock dose of psychotropic substances that day. And then the public was outraged that a man with such a criminal past and such criminal tendencies came out of prison, where he had been imprisoned 13 times in the last 10 years, and why he was released so quietly. Also, about a month before Carly's kidnapping, local authorities requested a Florida judge to issue a warrant for Joseph Smith's arrest based on a probation violation. However, the judge did not issue the warrant, citing that the police had not filled out the necessary paperwork. And thus went the reasoning that if this man had been shielded from society from the beginning, perhaps this terrible case could have been avoided as well. Little Carly would be alive, and her mother wouldn't have to go through all these terrible events. The day everything was decided was October 24th, 2005. Joseph Smith was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to death by lethal injection. He remained in prison awaiting his death sentence. Smith was also suspected in the 2000 murder of 25-year-old Tara Riley, who was found dead and naked in a pond behind a Walmart store, but that case was never solved. Although John, who opposed his brother in court, claimed that Joseph was the one who killed Tara, but he is a coward and cannot admit it. John was 100% sure that his brother is guilty of this too. John said, "My brother is the ultimate coward. All his life he has insulted and humiliated those weaker than him. He will never admit to what he has done, and if he is left free, who knows how many more innocent lives he will take. He's always been like this, which is why his wife ran away from him. But his parents believed to the last that he was a good man." On July 18th, 2017, Joseph's death sentence was overturned and a new bill was signed. According to it, the jury was to vote 10 out of 10 in favor of the death penalty. Joseph was to have been given a new sentencing hearing. However, it was postponed. Carly's mother, Susan, as soon as she learned of her daughter's death, the grief-stricken mother began using illegal substances. The death of her only daughter was an unbearable loss for her. Susan tried to pull herself together. She helped the Children's Defense Fund and other parents in the search for the missing. With all her might, she tried to help others not to face such terrible events. After all, Susan understood what it was like to go through such an experience. But having learned that Joseph was going to be pardoned from the death penalty, and possibly subsequently released, Susan, after all, lost the meaning in life, could not stand it, and died, taking a lethal dose of forbidden substances. Smith was awaiting a sentencing review hearing scheduled for 2019 that could have saved his life. Joseph Smith was able to avoid the death penalty, but in March 2021, the Attorney General's office confirmed that he should have a new sentencing hearing. Smith died on July 26, 2021 in prison at the age of 55. The cause of his death still could not be determined. At the end of this story, we would like to say that the perpetrator took the life of little Carly, ruined the life of Susan, Carly's family and friends. He was also involved in other horrible crimes that can never be justified. What do you think? Share your thoughts on this story in the comments. Subscribe, like, and thank you for watching. Take care of yourself and your loved ones.